Chapter 381. The cold voice caused the surrounding temperature to drop several degrees. Even though they didn't see the owner of the voice, everyone couldn't help but feel afraid. They all timidly stared at the tightly closed curtains. The coachman, Old Lin, replied, "Not completely. Please forgive me, master." Continue. Long Fei Yi lazily leaned back in the carriage with one hand supporting his head. His eyes were still closed and he didn't care about what was happening outside at all. Han Yunxi also lazily leaned back, her gaze never leaving Long Fei Yi's silent and cold face. She had a smile on her face the entire time. She realized that she really didn't like the wrong person. This kind of man was too domineering. Continue to crash. Hearing this, Nangwa Jun jumped up from the ground in fright. The coachman followed closely behind. The master and servant didn't even think about it and dodged to the side. One had to know that there was nothing in front of them to block. If they continued to crash, they would definitely be sent flying by the white horse. Looking at that tall horse, just thinking about it made them feel terrified. Just as Nangwa Jun and his servant dodged, Old Lin directly drove the carriage over. With a bang, the carriage was smashed into pieces, sending debris flying in all directions. The two masters in the carriage didn't even show their faces. The coachman also didn't turn around. He continued at his original speed, calmly and elegantly driving forward. Everyone was stunned. This was the first time they saw such a domineering person, and also the first time they saw such a domineering and elegant person. Who exactly was inside the carriage? Nangwa Jun looked at the scattered debris and stared blankly for a while before he recovered. He kicked the coachman and immediately roared, "Why aren't you calling people over? Preposterous, preposterous." This was the center of the entire South Ning prefecture. Dispatching people was a matter of minutes. Once Nangwa Jun gave the order, rows of officials rushed out from all directions and surrounded Long Fei Yi's carriage. Seeing the carriage stop, Nangwa Jun swaggered out and fiercely whipped the air. He angrily said, "Listen carefully, this young master is called Nangwa Jun. South Ning Prefecture's young master. You dare to crash into this young master's carriage? You must be tired of living." The coachman, Old Lin, was impatient. He coldly said, "Young master Nangwa, my master is not someone you can afford to offend. Get out of the way." This young master wants to see just what kind of person this young master can't afford to offend. As soon as Nangwa Jun finished speaking, he waved his hand. More than 10 officers and soldiers from both sides moved forward together, intending to arrest them. Unexpectedly, before they could even get close to the carriage, a slender and fair hand suddenly stretched out from the carriage. The hand was holding a golden token, and on the token was a mighty and domineering Qin character. Seeing this, all the soldiers stopped in their tracks and froze on the spot. Aside from His Highness Duke of Qin, who else would dare to carve the word Qin on a command tablet? Oh my God! His Highness Duke of Qin was in the carriage. His Highness Duke of Qin, who had been missing for so long, had actually come? In an instant, all of the soldiers fell to their knees and cried in unison, "Long live your Highness Duke of Qin!" The surrounding crowd quickly followed suit and knelt on the ground. Everyone was shocked and fearful. Nangwa Jun was completely dumbfounded. His legs gave way and he also fell to his knees. He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. The Duke of Qin, forget about him, even his father, the prefectural governor, couldn't afford to offend him. What should he do? Nangwa Jun was dumbfounded, his mind blank. What should he do? He'd caused a disaster. While everyone was kneeling, Long Fei Yi finally alighted from the carriage. He personally helped Han Yunxi down. Only now did everyone realize that esteemed Wang Fei had come with them. Nangwa Jun really wanted to raise his head and see His Highness Duke of Qin's true appearance, but he didn't dare. He could only kneel in place, trembling. Long Fei Yi held Han Yunxi's hand and walked over to Nangwa Jun step by step. Nangwa Jun was so scared that his head almost fell to the ground. "Can this prince afford to offend you?" Long Fei Yi asked. Nangwa Jun didn't dare answer. He almost cried out, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, spare me. Spare me. You also know that this prince wants your life?" Long Fei Yi asked with interest. Nangwa Jun was scared out of his wits. He repeatedly kowtowed and begged, "This lowly one was wrong, this lowly one was gravely wrong. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please spare this lowly one this time. This lowly one truly knows his wrongs." Han Yunxi looked on Nangwa coldly. She hated people with no ambition like this the most. People could be arrogant, but they definitely couldn't lack ambition. Although people like this were loathsome, Han Yunxi still couldn't understand. With Long Fei Yi's personality, he wouldn't waste time on people like this. What was he planning to do? Han Yunshi soon had an answer. Long Fei said coldly, "Your lordship can spare you if you want, but," before he could finish, Nangguijun hurriedly said, "As long as your highness spares this lowly one will agree to anything. Before the sun sets, give everyone in the city 2 jin of grain," Long Fei Yi said. Nangguijun felt like he'd been struck by lightning at these words. He gaped, while the commoners and even the soldiers almost screamed. 2 jin of grain for each person was a beautiful dream at the end of a famine. South Ning Prefecture was a disaster area, but the provincial governor would definitely be able to get his hands on grain. For one thing, the provincial governor's estate would definitely have grain stored up, and so would the minor officials in the various towns and villages. These grains were either used to exploit the peasants, or sent down by the corrupt imperial court for disaster relief. Amidst their excitement and surprise, the commoners began to question the rumors from before. They all said that His Highness Duke of Qin had embezzled and abandoned the disaster victims. But they'd seen and heard things with their own eyes. His Highness Duke of Qin had forced the provincial governor to spit out his embezzled grain on his first day in South Ning Prefecture. Who among Tianning's civil and military officials had such ability and boldness? "What, you can't do it?" Long Fei Yi said as he elegantly raised his foot to step on Nangguijun's head. This action was full of humiliation and simply went too far. If this was any other time, everyone would think that His Highness Duke of Qin was being unreasonable and bullying. But right now, the commoners and even the soldiers who'd been bullied by Nangguijun were all secretly cheering in their hearts. Many of them even hoped that His Highness Duke of Qin would stomp harder. With his life at the mercy of another's foot, Nangguijun wouldn't dare say no even if he had the gall to do so. "Your Highness, this one can do it. This one will do it right away." Nangguijun didn't think too much. In any case, he knew that there weren't many people in the city. If each person was given 2 jin of grain, his father would definitely be able to get his hands on it. A few months ago, the National Treasury had distributed a large batch of grain to South Ning Prefecture. The higher-ups had embezzled some of it and so had his father. The remaining third had been distributed from the provincial governor's estate to the various counties and villages, where some had been embezzled. If his father didn't have enough grain on hand, he could ask the leaders of the various counties and villages for more. "What if you can't hand over the grain before sunset?" Long Fei Yi asked. The crowd was deathly silent. Everyone subconsciously stood on His Highness Duke of Qin's side, waiting for Nangguijun's answer. They were afraid that they'd miss a single word. After all, this concerned everyone's rations. If I can't do it, your Highness can punish me however you want," Nangguijun hastily promised. "How will you punish me?" Long Fei Yi asked again. Nangguijun thought for a moment, then said, "I'll pay with my life." "How much is your life worth?" Long Fei Yi asked again. To the side, Han Yunshi, who'd been keeping her composure this entire time, was bewildered. Long Fei Yi had always been a man of few words, so why was he spouting so much nonsense today? What did he want to do? Nangguijun also knew that his life wasn't worth much in front of His Highness Duke of Qin. After some thought, he simply said, "And my father's life." As soon as he said this, Han Yunshi immediately understood. Long Fei Yi's target was the prefectural governor. She chuckled. "Nangguijun, you're truly rebellious. What kind of son would use his father's life to make a promise?" Unexpectedly, Nangguijun actually spoke with righteous indignation. To reply, esteemed Wang Fei, "It's the father's fault for not teaching his son well. This humble one has committed such a grave mistake today precisely because my father neglected to teach him. Thus, my father must bear the main responsibility." As soon as he said this, Han Yunshi almost burst out laughing. Who knew if Nangguo prefectural governor would be angered to death if he heard this? "Your Highness Duke of Qin, I beg of you, please let this humble one go. This humble one will immediately go look for rations." Nangguijun was anxious. If he was stepped on again, even breathing would become difficult for him. After discussing the terms, Long Fei Yi finally released Nangguijun. Nangguijun practically scrambled to escape. Although he left, many of the soldiers didn't want to leave. Like the commoners, they surrounded Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi. Someone suddenly shouted, "Your Highness Duke of Qin is wise and brilliant. His Highness Duke of Qin has come to save everyone." In a flash, everyone agreed and fell to their knees in unison as they cheered loudly. Actually, the commoners weren't stupid but kind and pure. They didn't have high demands and only cared about the most basic needs of food and clothing. They believed the rumors, but they only cared about food and clothing. They didn't have any ill intentions. They would be deeply grateful to anyone who treated them well and gave them the most basic guarantees. As Han Yunshi stared at their simple faces and expectant eyes, she felt both gratified and pressured. She turned back to look at Long Feiyi, only to see a resolute glint in his eyes. She knew that Long Feiyi was definitely going to take care of the disaster relief. This was Tianning's coldest and most ambitious king who wanted to conquer the world. His heart was very, very big, but it also contained the most unremarkable commoners. As she looked at Long Feiyi's cold profile, Han Yunshi suddenly felt a sense of anticipation. She was looking forward to the day when this man would take control of the country and rule over the world. Long Feiyi and Han Yunshi didn't go to the senior provincial official's estate, but stayed at an inn instead. News of Nanguijun's death quickly spread throughout the entire South Ning prefecture, including the districts outside the city. The senior provincial official had long since received the news. Slap. A loud and clear slap resounded through the entire mansion. Nanguijun was slapped to the ground by his father. Unfilial son. Beast. Stupid pig. Trash. The senior provincial official kicked him, so angry that his neck had turned red. If this wasn't his only son, he would have cut him down long ago. He never thought that he'd give birth to such a stupid thing. This was simply retribution. Although Nanguijun was frightened by his father, he still talked back. Father, how was I supposed to know that His Highness Duke of Qin would come? Didn't I already say he went missing? You're still talking. The senior provincial official slapped him again. He was so angry that he wanted to kill himself. His Highness Duke of Qin's disappearance was just a rumor spread by the higher-ups. His Highness Duke of Qin had come to provide disaster relief this time. If he couldn't buy food, he would definitely investigate the corrupt officials and bring back the embezzled food for disaster relief. At this critical juncture, anyone who offended the Duke of Qin would have to die. The senior provincial official didn't want to waste any more words with his stupid son. He had no choice but to consider another matter. The imperial uncle's estate had long ago sent someone to find him to discuss a major matter. He hadn't agreed at first, but now it looked like he had no choice but to agree. Chapter 382. His Highness Duke of Qin had asked Nanguijun to distribute 2 jin of grain to everyone in the city before sunset. It was currently noon, which meant there were only 6 hours left until sunset. Official Nangua dearly wanted to give Nanguijun a good beating, but he didn't have time. He had to think of a solution as soon as possible. Otherwise, His Highness Duke of Qin's personality might make him and his father suffer as soon as sunset arrived for all the officials in the disaster areas to see. Logically speaking, official Nangua should pay respects to His Highness Duke of Qin as soon as he arrived at Nangua Prefecture. But after such a major incident, official Nangua had no idea what to do. How could he dare to go? Someone come, keep an eye on this unfilial son for old man, don't let him take a single step out of the gates. Official Nangua left behind these vicious words before hurrying out of the estate. He went to a hidden residence not far from the senior provincial official's estate, where the official sent by the imperial uncle's estate was staying. As soon as Emperor Tianhui ordered the Duke of Qin to go to the disaster areas, the imperial uncle's estate had sent someone here in secret. This person was none other than official Yu from the Ministry of Revenue, who was in charge of managing the grain distribution. After the famine broke out, official Yu had been ordered to investigate the distribution of grain in the disaster areas. Logically speaking, official Yu was supposed to clean up the corrupt officials below him, but he'd embezzled from his own people to help the imperial uncle's estate get plenty of grain and falsified accounts. Under these circumstances, he could turn a blind eye to the corrupt officials below him. As long as they didn't go too far, he wouldn't pursue the matter even if he had evidence in his hands. After all, the upper echelons of the government were no longer upright. In order to seal the mouths of his subordinates and send in reports of impeachment, he'd have to give them some benefits. Besides, official Yu didn't just take bribes from the imperial uncle's estate. Many people in the disaster area had also given him benefits. Official Yu lived in South Ning Prefecture, so official Nangua naturally worshipped him like a bodhisattva. No matter what official Yu asked for, official Nangua was the first to satisfy him. However, there was one thing that official Nangua had yet to agree to. Today, official Nangua had hurried to his door precisely for this matter. Official Yu was just about to leave when official Nangua arrived. Hehe, official Nangua, you came at the right time. Look what your good son has done. This official was just about to go look for you. Official Yu said angrily. Official Nangua had a helpless expression on his face. Official Yu, this lowly official didn't even have time to pay his respects to His Highness Duke of Qin before rushing over to discuss this matter with you. Discuss with this official? What else do we have to discuss? To tell you the truth, the matter I mentioned was personally instructed by the higher-ups, yet you're still hesitating. What? Did you have to wait until something happened before coming to find me? Official Yu said disdainfully. If it wasn't for the fact that South Ning Prefecture was the largest prefecture in the country and a disaster area, as well as one of the most important cities in Tianning Central regions, the imperial uncle would never have chosen Official Nangua, whose stance was still unclear. Lord Yu, you can't say that, Official Nangua spoke as he pulled Official Yu into the room. Lowering his voice, he added, Official Yu, His Highness Duke of Qin isn't someone to be trifled with. That's something everyone in Tianning knows. This official is only thinking for the sake of our lives. If the matter you mentioned doesn't succeed, then we'll both lose our lives. The higher-ups have always abandoned the pawns to protect the general. Official Yu wanted Official Nangua to do nothing more than gather the disaster victims and incite them to revolt. They'd accuse His Highness Duke of Qin of embezzlement and threaten him to hand over the grain. They weren't planning a small rebellion, but a massive one that would spread from South Ning Prefecture to all of the disaster areas. His Highness Duke of Qin had ventured into the disaster areas alone without a single guard. As soon as the tens of thousands of people decided to revolt and add fuel to the fire, His Highness Duke of Qin would lose the hearts of the people if he couldn't hand over the grain. Emperor Tianhui might even punish him and strip him of his title of Qin Wang to quell the people's anger. This was a huge trap that Official Nangua had no choice but to consider carefully. If they failed and allowed His Highness Duke of Qin to counterattack, just as he had said, the ones who would die the quickest would be him and Official Yu. Official Yu snorted disdainfully at Official Nangua's considerations. Then what are you doing here today? Official Nangua was in a difficult position. He lowered his head and sighed. A cold smile rose to Official Yu's lips. Official Nangua, I think it's getting late. If you don't have anything else to do, you should hurry and get the grain. There's at least 20,000 people in South Ning Prefecture. That's a lot of grain for each person. Official Nangua sighed again and again. His son hadn't underestimated him. He really did have the skills to get so much grain in such a short time, but His Highness Duke of Qin only had to ask him, where did you get all this grain, and he'd be in trouble. In the end, he raised his head and said, Lord Yu, regarding the matter you mentioned, this lowly official has a plan. We can use this opportunity to give it a try. What do you think, Official Yu? Official Yu was waiting for these exact words. He laughed out loud and said, Feel free to speak. Official Nangua scooted closer and whispered in Official Yu's ear for a long time. Official Yu listened intently until a satisfied smile appeared on his face. In the end, Official Yu was overjoyed. He chuckled and said, Excellent, excellent. Let's split up. Once we're done, this official will definitely report to the higher-ups. Your transfer to the imperial capital. It won't be long now. After bidding farewell to Official Yu, Official Nangua hurried to the inn where Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi were staying. Even in the teeth of the storm, Long Feiyi was still generous enough to reserve the most luxurious inn in South Ning Prefecture. Before there were rumors of his corruption, he'd always been this extravagant. When he didn't need to hide his identity or whereabouts, he had very high standards for food, clothing, housing, and transportation. When Official Nangua arrived, Long Feiyi was drinking tea with Han Yunxi in the second-floor lobby. As soon as he reached the staircase, Official Nangua led the officials behind him to kneel and kowtow. This official, Nangua Mingda of South Ning Prefecture, greets Your Highness Duke of Qin. May Your Highness live thousands and thousands of years. May Your Highness live thousands and thousands of years. May Your Highness live thousands and thousands of years. You may rise, he coldly said after a few glances, you may rise. This icy voice was enough to make everyone present tremble. The other officials didn't even dare to look at him. After they rose, they all lowered their heads and waited in place, trembling with fear. Official Nangua was also apprehensive. He bent at the waist and hurried forward. This official came late to receive Your Highness and caused my unfilial son to offend Your Highness. This official asks for Your Highness' forgiveness. So, you father and son don't plan on giving out grain? As Long Feiyi spoke, he turned to look at Official Nangua. When Official Nangua met those cold, emotionless eyes, he immediately shivered and hurriedly lowered his head. His heart was filled with fear and he didn't dare look at him again. He'd always heard that His Highness Duke of Qin was a cold and emotionless person. His methods were vicious and he never showed mercy to anyone. Now that Official Nangua saw it with his own eyes, he somewhat regretted agreeing to Official Yu's request. However, he was already at the end of his rope. Now that the arrow had been knocked, he had no choice but to release it. This official doesn't dare. This official will do his utmost to carry out your highness's orders. This official will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. Official Nangua hurriedly expressed his stance. Then go. Long Fei spoke as he looked out the window. It's getting late. Seeing His Highness Duke of Qin's frosty profile, official Nangua almost wanted to retreat for a moment. However, for the sake of survival, for the sake of fighting for that last sliver of hope, he braced himself and persisted. He feigned a troubled expression and said helplessly, Your Highness Duke of Qin, there are a total of 23,000 people registered in the city. If each person has 2 jin of grain, that's more than 40,000 jin. Not to mention the current disaster, this official wouldn't be able to gather so much grain even in a normal year. You mean to say that this prince is deliberately making things difficult for you father and son? Long Fei asked. Han Yunxi calmly sipped her tea on the side as she watched Long Fei abuse people. Official Nangua was so scared that his forehead was covered in sweat. He hurriedly explained, this official wouldn't dare. It's just that the amount of grain is too large. This official is powerless. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please judge clearly. You mean to say that this prince has been played by your son? Long Fei asked again. Han Yunxi almost spat out her tea when she heard this. Official Nangua was so frightened that he fell to his knees with a thump. My son wouldn't dare. Your Highness misunderstands. My son doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and spoke wildly, offending your Highness. This official has come to apologize to your Highness. Your Highness, please forgive this lowly one's transgression. Please spare my son this once. At this time, Long Fei finally looked him in the eye and said sternly, Nangua Mingda, the 20,000 people in the city are all waiting for grain. Now you're telling this prince that you can't hand it over? Teach this prince how to explain this to the people. Official Nangua fell silent, not knowing how to respond. At this time, Han Yunxi sighed softly. Your Highness, official Nangua really can't hand over that much grain. As this concubine sees it, just do as Nangua Jun says and pay with his life. 2 lives to quell the resentment of 20,000 people, haha, it's worth it. Official Nangua's heart trembled at these words. Just a moment ago he had been thinking of retreating, but now he was determined to fight official Yu to the end. He hurriedly said, Your Highness, please spare my life. Spare my life. This official will immediately go and transfer the grain. This official will do his best. After leaving the inn, official Nangua felt that his breathing had become much smoother. He had only come here to put on a show. Of course he would still transfer the grain. If he didn't, how could he continue the show? Tonight there would be a good show to watch in South Ning City. Long Fei and Han Yunxi stood side by side at the window, watching official Nangua's departing figure. Your Highness, this prefectural governor isn't stupid enough to really transfer the grain, right? According to Han Yunxi's understanding, the prefectural governor was a high-ranking official. Anyone who could climb to this position wasn't simple. Long Fei didn't answer her. Instead, he muttered to himself, where did the disaster victims go? South Ning City was the center of South Ning Prefecture. They had traveled all the way from the north, so they had passed through more than half of South Ning Prefecture. So far, they hadn't seen a large number of disaster victims. The news that the city would be sending out grain before sunset today must have spread, but there was still no sign of a flood of disaster victims swarming into the city. What was going on? Chapter 383. Han Yunxi had been pondering Long Fei's suspicions the entire time. Your Highness, there has to be a trap somewhere. Han Yunxi was certain. Before Nangua Mingda had arrived, she'd asked the guards and found that South Ning City's 4 main gates were still open. There was no way the disaster victims had been locked up outside the city walls. They'd suspected that the victims might be begging for grain on their way here, but that didn't seem to be the case now. Could it be that the disaster victims had been controlled? It was normal for imperial envoys to miss the victims while patrolling the disaster areas. Normally speaking, the local officials would arrange their itineraries and routes ahead of time, so there was no need to chase away the victims. Even if they didn't arrange the routes beforehand, the local officials had plenty of ways to chase the victims to places they couldn't see. But news of Long Fei's corruption had spread like wildfire. Even if official Nangua wanted to hide the disaster victims, his superiors wouldn't agree. They'd definitely use the victims to make trouble and embarrass Long Fei. Long Fei and Han Yunxi were still lost in thought when Chu Shifeng arrived. Smiling, he said, Your Highness, I have 2 pieces of news, one good, one bad. All right, Chu Shifeng obediently told him the news. He didn't have the guts to let His Highness Duke of Qin choose between the good and bad news first. Your Highness, the good news is that a messenger pigeon has just arrived. The grain from the other 2 disaster areas has all arrived without anyone noticing. Right now they're all waiting outside the disaster areas for your orders. Half of the 3 million dan of grain that Long Fei Yi had scammed from the imperial uncle's estate were waiting outside South Ning City in secret. The other half had been divided equally between the other 2 disaster areas. Now that they'd arrived, they were only waiting for Long Fei Yi's orders to enter the city and distribute the grain. Long Fei Yi had come to distribute grain and, more importantly, to arrest the corrupt officials. Even though they had scammed a lot of grain from the imperial uncle's estate, there were even more disaster victims. There was a limit to the amount of grain that could be distributed to each disaster victim. It was hard to say if they could even last until next month, let alone survive through the winter. It was already early winter, and in 2 months, it would be December. At that time it would be freezing cold and there wouldn't even be any wild herbs. Who knew how the disaster victims would survive? Therefore, official Nangwa's considerations were correct. If His Highness Duke of Qin couldn't get the grain, he would definitely target the corrupt officials and force them to spit out all the grain they had eaten. Seeing that his master only nodded without giving orders, Chu Shifeng hastened to tell him the bad news. The guards have already found out that all of the disaster victims in the outskirts of South Ning Prefecture have been gathered together in one of the villages. As this subordinate sees it, they must be part of an organization. As soon as he said this, Han Yunshi immediately smiled. Your Highness, it seems that they have been waiting for you for a long time. Long Fei Yi only said 4 words. Let's wait and see what happens tonight. Time didn't stop for anyone or anything. 6 hours passed in a hurry before the sun began to set. Nangwa Jun was shut up in the senior provincial official's estate as he stared at the setting sun. He wanted to cry but had no tears. In the afternoon, he saw his father send people to take away all of the grain stored in the estate's accounts. The grain stored in the estate's accounts wasn't embezzled, but normal. After all, the senior provincial official's estate had to support a group of officials to manage the entire South Ning Prefecture. There wasn't much grain left, only enough to feed the 500 or so people in the estate for a month. As far as he knew, there was plenty of grain stored in the cellars of the estate as well. His father hadn't touched a single grain, so he had no idea how his father would deal with the matter. He only hoped that his father wouldn't take it out on him after he returned. The appointed time hadn't arrived yet, but all of the city's commoners had brought their families to line up in front of the estate's gates to wait for the grain to be distributed. By the time the sun set, more than 20,000 people had arrived. Nearly 20 long lines were formed from the entrance of the prefectural governor's manor all the way to the city gates. The scene could be described as overwhelming and majestic. Even the orderly lines tightly blocked the gates of the estate. It was impossible to imagine what the consequences would be if a riot broke out with so many people gathered at such a high density. When Long Fei Ye's carriage drove out of the alley, the people on the main road immediately parted to let him pass. No matter what the rumors were, the one who distributed the grain was their heavens, their earth, and their parents. When Long Fei Yi arrived at the estate's gates, they were surprisingly still tightly shut. If it weren't for Long Fei Yi holding the fort, everyone would have already begun to cause a ruckus. Does your excellency intend to go back on your word? Long Fei Yi asked coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, official Nangwa's voice rang out. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please calm your anger. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please calm your anger. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw official Nangwa jogging out of a nearby alley with a few servants. Not long after, carriages loaded with grain slowly drove out of the alley. What could make the people more excited than seeing grain? In an instant, everyone stepped aside and respectfully opened up a path that was even wider than the one they'd given Long Fei Yi. Official Nangwa personally directed the carriages and didn't forget to remind the driver to be careful and not to hurt any passers-by. It had to be said that his amiable image was far too different from his son's image of speeding on the road this morning. It was especially pretentious. Carriages after carriages of grain were transported out of the alley. Everyone was excited to see this, but, not long after, the convoy was cut off. Official Nangwa had only brought 10 carriages of grain. Each carriage had 8 caddies, so it was only 80 caddies. Long Fei Yi watched all of this without saying a word. Soon the people began to panic and talk among themselves. Is this all the grain? Is it enough to share? Isn't everyone supposed to get some? Is it 2 caddies? They said 2 caddies this morning. At first they were just discussing the amount of grain, but someone suddenly shouted, "Everyone don't panic. His Highness Duke of Qin will definitely do what he promised. Immediately, the crowd shifted their attention to Long Fei Yi. Right, His Highness Duke of Qin promised. Everyone please calm down. His Highness Duke of Qin is an imperial envoy. He'll definitely give everyone what he promised. His Highness will definitely find a way to get grain. If Han Yunxi was here to hear this, she'd definitely roll her eyes. These people were too good at bullshitting. It was clearly Nangua Jun who promised, so why did it suddenly become Long Fei Yi's promise? Unfortunately, she wasn't present at the scene. Only Long Fei Yi was present. Even Chu Shifeng wasn't present. Long Fei Yi was dressed in brocade robes as he stood on the steps of the senior provincial official's estate with his hands clasped behind his back. Despite the discussions below, he remained lofty and unmoving, as steady as Mount Tai. His icy gaze rested on official Nangua the entire time. Official Nangua put on an act as he supported the carriage full of grain all the way to the gates of the senior provincial official's estate. He was panting for breath but had no time to rest. He quickly bowed and said, "Good luck to your Highness Duke of Qin. This official came late in order to find grain. I hope your Highness will forgive me." At this moment all the discussion stopped abruptly. Everyone's attention was focused on this. Although the people at the back of the line wanted to get closer to see what was going on, so far, everyone was still very orderly. No one cut in line to fight. "How much grain did you find?" Long Fei Yi's icy voice chilled the air. "To reply, your Highness, this official personally went out of the city this afternoon and found a total of 80 dan of grain. Combined with the 100 dan of grain from the senior provincial official's estate, we have 180 dan in total." Official Nangua knocked on the door as he spoke. The doors to the estate opened and a few burly men carried out the dan after dan of grain. The crowd grew even quieter at the mention of over 1,000 jin. Over 1,000 jin wasn't a small amount for a single person or a family. But to the 20,000 people in the long line, it was a number that would make them cry on the spot. How much would one person get if more than 20,000 people were to divide it among themselves? Not even a single meal. Soon, the crowd began to feel uneasy and whispered among themselves. However, no one dared to raise their voices. After all, His Highness Duke of Qin hadn't spoken yet. "Nangua Mingda, are you trying to take advantage of this prince's inability to count, or are you trying to take advantage of the 20,000 people here?" Long Fei asked angrily, which silenced the entire crowd. Nangua Mingda immediately fell to his knees. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, please spare my life. There are 20,000 people in South Ning City. If each person has 2 jin of grain, that's over 40,000 jin. No matter how capable this official is, I can't find that much grain." As Nangua Mingda spoke, he raised his voice and said, "Your Highness, this humble official brought all of this food from the various yamen. It's the food that the imperial court left for the yamen to feed the officials and soldiers. Currently, this official has emptied all of the yamen's grain reserves in the 4 counties and 8 townships under South Ning Prefecture's jurisdiction. All of the prefectural governor's estate's grain is also here. This official is truly powerless. If your Highness Duke of Qin still thinks this isn't enough, then you can take this official's life. My son is the only descendant of the Nangua clan. I beg your Highness to spare him on account of his youth and ignorance." Nangua Mingda spoke eloquently, tears streaming down his face. When he finished speaking, he turned to kneel before the crowd. "Everyone, I, Nangua Mingda, am the magistrate of South Ning Prefecture, yet I can't even protect a single mouthful of grain for everyone. I am truly ashamed of myself." The word protect was rather interesting, as if it was hinting at something. The common people had heard so many rumors. Some were about the Duke of Qin's embezzlement, others about the prefectural governor's embezzlement, and others about minor officials' embezzlement. However, they didn't know which rumors were true and which were false. Seeing Nangua Mingda's mournful appearance and hearing that he was willing to give up his own life, many people began to question the rumors about Nangua Mingda's embezzlement. Perhaps everyone had misunderstood this magistrate. At this critical juncture, it was already quite good that he was willing to contribute the grain reserves of the various yamens and prefectural governor's estate. In the end, the common people were still soft-hearted. At this moment, someone in the crowd shouted, "Official Nangua, you can't die. Official Nangua has already done his best. It's not Official Nangua's fault that we can't find any grain." As soon as these words were spoken, a manservant rushed out of the prefectural governor's estate and knelt before Long Fei Yi in tears. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, please spare my life. Please spare Official Nangua." Official Nangua even took out the grain he gave to his old mother. There's not a single grain left in the estate. As soon as these words were spoken, the common people broke out into discussion. Nangwa Mingda had unexpectedly become the target of their sympathy and even respect. This. Chapter 384. Indeed, public opinion could be manipulated. Because of the first sentence from the prefectural governor's manservant, more than 20,000 commoners became agitated. At this moment, several people in the crowd of more than 20,000 people shouted loudly from different directions. Official Nangwa didn't embezzle any grain. Where would he find so much? Your Highness Duke of Chin, please spare Official Nangwa. Official Nangwa is devoted to the commoners and even took out his mother's grain. That's right, please spare Official Nangwa, Your Highness Duke of Chin. Everyone, let's beg Your Highness Duke of Chin. Gradually, the voices begging for mercy for Nangwa Mingda grew louder and louder. Those who didn't want to beg for mercy for Nangwa Mingda had no choice but to keep quiet or shout with the rest. Soon quite a few people knelt and begged. Long Fei Yi was fighting for food for the commoners, but in the end, it became the commoners begging for mercy for Nangwa Mingda. It had to be said that this was Nangwa Mingda's ability. What skill! Long Fei Yi was like a bystander in the face of all this. He lowered his head and looked at Nangwa Mingda, who was kneeling at his feet, with a trace of disdain on his lips. How could Long Fei Yi care about such methods? Nangwa Mingda didn't dare to look up at Long Fei Yi. He kept his head down and his astute eyes darted around a few times before he hurriedly looked at the commoners. He raised his hands. Everyone quiet down. Listen to me. Needless to say, he was quite daring. As soon as he spoke, everyone quieted down. Everyone, today to have all of you plead for mercy for me. I, Nangwa Mingda, didn't become the governor for nothing. It was worth it. If I die by Emperor Qin's sword today, I will die without regrets in front of everyone. There's only one thing I can't let go of. If I leave, who will ask for grain for everyone? Hearing these words and seeing Nangwa Mingda's solemn expression, the crowd couldn't help but feel sorrowful. Many of them even revealed expressions of reluctance. Official Nangwa really cared about the commoners at all times. Nangwa Mingda continued to speak loudly. To be honest, only 2,000 dan of the imperial court's food was distributed to South Ning County, which is what was distributed to the victims in the suburbs last month. Everyone knew that there was very little food for the disaster relief, but they didn't know that there was so little food here. Once these words were spoken, there was an uproar. No wonder Official Nangwa hadn't distributed any rations. It turned out that he had his own difficulties. Everyone listen to me. Please don't plead for me anymore. As everyone's official, I, Nangwa Mingda, am willing to die to atone for my crimes. I only ask that Your Highness Duke of Qin take pity on the tens of thousands of people in South Ning Prefecture and give us more food. After Nangwa Mingda finished speaking, he finally raised his head to look at Long Fei Yi. When he met Long Fei Yi's scrutinizing gaze, he felt guilty, but in the end he held it in. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Where is the food from the imperial court? What took it away?" In another direction, someone shouted, "There's still the money for the imperial court's disaster relief. I haven't seen it either." Your Highness Duke of Qin, where is the money from the charity auction? Tsk. Who gave these commoners the courage to directly question Long Fei Yi? Long Fei Yi's cold smile grew wider and wider, but Nangwa Mingda didn't understand. He turned to the source of the shout and said sternly, "Don't be impudent. His Highness Duke of Qin was sent by His Majesty to provide disaster relief. As an imperial envoy, His Highness Duke of Qin will definitely be able to save everyone from this disaster. He will definitely have a way to distribute food to everyone." Nangwa Mingda clearly knew that at this juncture, it would be extremely difficult to buy food even if one had the money, but he still flattered Long Fei Yi like this. This was no doubt kidnapping public opinion, or perhaps it was called overpraise. "Everyone, let's beg His Highness Duke of Qin to distribute the food. Your Highness Duke of Qin, don't make things difficult for official Nangwa anymore. Please distribute the food for everyone." Gradually, the long line of commoners surged forward, loudly begging for food with the people in front of them. The situation was about to spiral out of control. The commoners kept shouting, "Your Highness Duke of Qin," but Long Fei Yi didn't even spare them a glance. He was as cold as an iceberg. He lowered his eyes to look at Nangwa Mingda, his voice low and icy. "Are you done pretending?" he asked. Nangwa Mingda's entire body trembled, and he almost rolled down the stone steps. He hadn't expected this cold-faced prince to be so calm in the face of such chaos. He'd actually seen through his ruse with a single glance. Although he was afraid, Nangwa Mingda gritted his teeth and steadied himself. This was a moment of life and death. If he could pass this calamity, then everything would be fine. He would be promoted, become rich, and leave South Ning Prefecture. If he couldn't pass this calamity, then only death awaited him. He pretended not to hear Long Fei Ye's words. He took a step back and dropped to his knees in an exaggerated manner, kowtowing repeatedly. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please distribute the food. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please distribute the food. This was a secret signal. Seeing this, the servants behind him slipped away. Not long after, they came back with bad news. Reporting, a large number of disaster victims have poured into the southern part of the city. Your Highness Duke of Qin, please distribute the food. Reporting, a large number of disaster victims have broken through the city gates in the western part of the city. They're out of control, and they're shouting for Your Highness Duke of Qin to distribute the food. Reporting, more than 4,000 disaster victims are rioting in the eastern part of the city. The soldiers are unable to stop them, and they're already rushing this way. Without a doubt, Official Yu had rushed over to cooperate with Nangwa Mingda. A sinister smile flitted across Nangwa Mingda's lips. He stood up. Guards, protect His Highness Duke of Qin. It would have been better if he hadn't said this. As soon as he did, someone in the crowd immediately shouted, You can't let His Highness Duke of Qin leave. His Highness Duke of Qin must give everyone an explanation. Voices of agreement rose from all around. His Highness Duke of Qin can't leave. His Highness Duke of Qin can't leave without seeing the food. Your Highness Duke of Qin, didn't you use all the silver from the charity auction to buy food? Your Highness Duke of Qin, the National Treasury sent so much food. Where did it all go? The common people haven't seen a single grain. The 20,000 or so people were thrown into chaos. They surged forward in agitation. Someone let go of the fence and a group of people rushed in from behind. They blocked the gates of the governor's estate and trapped Long Fei Yi in the center. Pleas for food, protests and questions rose and fell. Soon, countless disaster victims poured in from all four sides of the city gates. These disaster victims were organized and had been incited long ago. They were even more agitated, indignant, and frenzied than the 20,000 people present. They all rushed forward without any regard for their lives. Their shouts were no longer polite but direct questions. Your Highness Duke of Qin, rumor has it that you embezzled the money from the charity auction and didn't use it to buy food. Is it true? Your Highness Duke of Qin, take out the food for everyone to see. Didn't you come to provide disaster relief? Why didn't the Imperial Envoy bring any food? Where's Qin Wangfei? Where's that troublemaker? Did Qin Wangfei spend all the money from the disaster relief? Your Highness Duke of Qin, where's the food from the Imperial Court? Where did it all go? You have to give everyone an explanation. The situation had completely spiraled out of control. There were even stampedes in several places. Nangwa Mingda ordered the soldiers to form a circle with their spears, separating the people around them and forming the last line of defense. At this time he put on a helpless expression. Your Highness, say something to everyone. How about this? How about what? Long Fei Yi countered. He was indifferent to the accusations of the crowd. His cold gaze swept over the people around him. So the disaster victims he'd been unable to see were all here. They'd all come. He'd been waiting for this group of people to come, waiting for them to make a scene, waiting for the person behind the scenes to show himself. Nangwa Mingda had already thrown caution to the wind. He answered seriously, Your Highness, there are tens of thousands of disaster victims in South Ning Prefecture. Why don't you avoid them? How could Long Fei Yi avoid them? If he did, it'd be a sign of guilt. Is everyone here? He asked coldly. Nangwa Mingda was very surprised. He couldn't figure out what Long Fei Yi meant. Is everyone here? Long Fei Yi asked again. Nangwa Mingda felt uneasy. He opened his mouth but didn't know how to answer. At this time, Official Yu, who was disguised in the crowd, saw the situation and hurriedly signaled the soldiers beside him with his eyes. The soldiers holding their spears suddenly let go of their spears. In an instant, tens of thousands of disaster victims swarmed forward. They looked like they wanted to tear people apart. Anyone who saw them would be afraid. Duke of Qin, you can't leave. Duke of Qin, hand over the grain. Hand over the embezzled grain. Hand over the silver for the disaster relief and hand over Qin Wangfei. These disaster victims had already become a mob. The words coming out of their mouths were even more terrifying than the rumors. They were filled with righteous indignation, accusation, questioning, and demands. Those who didn't know would believe that Long Fei Yi had embezzled the silver and grain. The previous rumors were all true. Seeing that the disaster victims were about to pounce, Long Fei Yi pulled out his sword without warning and raised it high to pierce the sky. In an instant, all of the oncoming disaster victims came to a screeching halt. Who would throw away their lives for the sake of a mouthful of grain and a single life? Long Fei Yi's single move stunned tens of thousands of disaster victims. By his side, Nangua Mingda was gaping. He assumed that His Highness Duke of Qin would have no choice but to flee, but he'd actually pulled out his sword. What is he planning to do? Official Yu was surprised as well, but his lips curved into a sinister smile. He thought that the Duke of Qin must have been forced into a corner. Either he wanted to kill off the people or kill Nangua Mingda. In any case, the situation had already reached a point of no return. Even if His Highness Duke of Qin didn't want to face the disaster victims, he would have to face it. No matter what he did, it would be impossible to salvage his image. The rumors would come true. The Duke of Qin had embezzled and was incapable of taking on the role of imperial envoy for disaster relief. Very soon news would spread to all of the disaster areas. Official Yu had long made arrangements for the rest of the disaster areas to erupt in riots like this one. All three disaster areas were rioting and denouncing His Highness Duke of Qin. When that happened, Emperor Tianhui could issue orders to thoroughly investigate His Highness Duke of Qin and strip him of his title of Qin Wang to quell the people's anger. Thinking up to here, Official Yu grew excited and decided to give the Duke of Qin another push. He shot a look at one of his guards, who immediately threw himself at Long Fei Yi's sword. Your Highness Duke of Qin, where's our grain? Chapter 385. The guard was prepared to lose his life. If Long Fei Yi decided to kill someone now, he would be in even more trouble. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi's long sword swerved to the side, causing the guard to miss. He stepped on the guard's body and swept his cold gaze over the crowd. This prince is here to deliver the grain. If anyone takes another step forward, I won't give a single grain. The crowd, already silent to begin with, grew even quieter at these words. No one dared to move. Was His Highness Duke of Qin really here to deliver the grain? What the commoners wanted was food. After hearing this, who would dare to touch it? However, Nangua Mingda and Official Yu were different. Separated by the crowd, they silently looked at each other, a tacit smile flashing across their eyes. Their superiors had clearly investigated how much grain His Highness Duke of Qin had in his manors in Jiangnan and how much he had already used. They were certain that His Highness Duke of Qin didn't have much grain on hand. He had money, but at this critical juncture he wouldn't be able to buy any grain. Even if he went to the black market, he wouldn't be able to buy that much grain. Most of the grain in the black market came from the imperial uncle's estate. How could they sell it to His Highness Duke of Qin? Nangua Mingda and Official Yu were smiling because they had achieved their goal. They had incited the commoners to revolt in order to force His Highness Duke of Qin into a corner. Instead of running away, His Highness Duke of Qin had chosen to say something like this. He was undoubtedly asking for trouble. If he couldn't fulfill his promise, it was easy to imagine how angry the commoners would be. At that time, even without their incitement, the commoners themselves wouldn't let His Highness Duke of Qin off. Nangua Mingda and Official Yu hadn't moved yet, but someone in the silent crowd had already spoken up. Dare I ask how much grain His Highness Duke of Qin intends to deliver? Nangua Mingda and Official Yu were secretly delighted, especially Nangua Mingda. He inwardly let out a sigh of relief. He had escaped this calamity. He could relax and watch the show. He wanted to see how the wise and foolish His Highness Duke of Qin would deal with the disaster victims. He thought that it wouldn't be long before this high and mighty king would regret provoking his precious son. Send as much as the national treasury allocates. South Ning County is a large county, so the amount of food allocated will not be small, Long Fei Yu replied. Many of the disaster victims rejoiced at his words. Some were so delighted that they questioned, "Is your Highness Duke of Qin speaking the truth?" However, Long Fei Yu did not take it to heart. He replied coldly, "Of course." Seeing this, everyone's courage gradually grew. "Dare I ask your Highness Duke of Qin, when will the grain be distributed?" "That's right." "Your Highness Duke of Qin, will you be distributing grain in the next few days? Can your Highness Duke of Qin hurry up and distribute the grain? We haven't eaten anything for days." Nangua Mingda sneered inwardly when he saw how excited the people were. He hadn't expected the Duke of Qin to lie in front of so many people. He wanted to see how the Duke of Qin would cover up this lie when the time came. Official Yu, who was hidden in the crowd, was laughing coldly. He couldn't wait to see the Duke of Qin's lie exposed. He wanted to see how this insufferably arrogant king would be drowned by the common people's spittle. Just the thought of it made him excited. Official Yu hid behind the people in front of him. He couldn't help but say, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, why don't you give everyone a clear time? Otherwise you'll disappoint everyone." Long Fei Ye's icy gaze swept over him. "Immediately," he said icily. "Immediately?" As soon as these words were spoken, the entire crowd burst into deafening cheers. Nangua Mingda and Official Yu were both stunned. How could this be? This lie was too much. How could they distribute the grain immediately? Where would they find the grain? "Your Highness Duke of Qin, then where is the grain?" Official Yu couldn't have found it, could he? Official Yu couldn't help but ask. This time Long Fei Yi didn't answer him. That was because a cry came from the back of the crowd. "The grain is here. It's here. We've got grain." What was going on? Everyone turned to look, including Nangua Mingda and Official Yu. However, there were too many people. All they could see were human heads. But the cheers in the distance grew louder and louder, deafening to the ears. "The grain is here. We've got grain. So much grain. Everyone's got grain. Long live your Highness Duke of Qin. Long live esteemed Wang Fei." Why did they mention Han Yunshi? She didn't even show up. Nangua Mingda and Official Yu were bewildered. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Gradually the cheers grew closer and closer. The refugees who'd surrounded Long Fei Yi all surged to the back, wanting to see what was going on. What was going on behind them? What was going on with the grain that everyone was talking about? Official Yu and Official Nangua's hearts itched. Official Nangua couldn't leave. After a moment's hesitation, Official Yu couldn't help but rush to the back with the refugees. However, he soon came to an abrupt halt. The refugees who were rushing to the back all consciously walked to the left and right, opening up a very wide path. They saw a convoy of carriages carrying grain approaching from afar. Each carriage was filled with sacks of grain, like a long dragon. Surrounded by tens of thousands of refugees, the convoy looked especially grand and imposing. At the head of the convoy was a woman. She was dressed in a luxurious purple robe. Riding on a tall horse, she looked down on the crowd like a queen on an inspection tour. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, she was noble, elegant, and inviolable. This woman was none other than Qin Wangfei Han Yunshi. It really is grain. Esteemed Wangfei, that must be esteemed Wangfei. Esteemed Wangfei is here to deliver grain to everyone. So much grain. So much grain. As the convoy gradually drew closer, the refugees all became excited. They danced with joy and joy. One had to know that what Qin Wangfei was escorting over wasn't anything else. It was food, it was hope, and it was their lives. There was no incitement or pretense. Soon, large swathes of refugees fell to their knees and shouted, "Long live His Highness Duke of Qin! Long live esteemed Wangfei!" In the end, everyone was kneeling. It was not hard to imagine how magnificent the scene of tens of thousands of disaster victims kneeling in the streets and alleys of the city would be. Official Nangua stood rooted to the spot, staring at the carriages of grain. He couldn't believe his eyes. How was this possible? Even if His Highness Duke of Qin had more grain, where would he get it from? Besides the imperial uncle's estate, who else in the world could take out so much grain? But there was no way the imperial uncle's estate would sell grain to the Duke of Qin. Official Nangua was stunned. Official Yu was so shocked that his entire body stiffened and he couldn't move. Even when everyone around him was kneeling, he still stood there in a daze, unable to recover his wits. How was he supposed to believe his eyes? This had to be a dream. Han Yunshi successfully delivered the convoy amidst the grateful kneeling crowd. She jumped off her tall horse and tidied her clothes before ascending the high steps of the governor's estate. "Your Highness Duke of Qin, this concubine has not failed her mission. 1,500,000 dan of grain have all been delivered. Please accept it." Han Yunshi's voice wasn't loud, but everyone present heard her clearly. 1,500,000 dan. Heavens, no wonder there were so many carriages transporting grain. Who would have thought there would be so much grain? 1,500,000 dan of grain was enough to feed all the refugees in South Ning Prefecture for 2 to 3 months. The cheers and cries of gratitude from the commoners grew louder and louder. Wave after wave, the sound was indescribably deafening. At this moment they only knew that they had grain. They had real grain that they could see with their own eyes. As for those rumors, they had long since forgotten about them. His Highness Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei were their great benefactors. How could they be corrupt? Someone else had to be the culprit. His Highness Duke of Qin had to be here to arrest the corrupt officials. Official Nangua, why don't you go make an inventory? Long Fei Yi spoke up. Nangua Mingda's legs turned to jelly as he fell to his knees. He didn't even know how to reply. Official Yu finally recovered his wits and wanted to kneel as well, but it was too late. Long Fei Yi had long noticed him. Since Chu Shifeng had already found out where the refugees were gathering, how could he not know that Official Yu from the Ministry of Revenue was the mastermind behind the scenes? Official Yu, or will you go? Long Fei Yi asked. Official Yu's legs trembled as he fell to his knees as well. Still, he was one of the imperial uncle's chosen men, so he was able to keep his composure. Esteemed Wang Fei says as much as she wants. His Highness Duke of Qin has finally delivered grain. His Highness Duke of Qin is a blessing to the refugees and Tianning. This official's admiration is indescribable. Official Yu was even more excited than the people around him. As he spoke, he fell to his knees and cried out, "May His Highness Duke of Qin live for thousands and thousands of years. May esteemed Wang Fei live for thousands and thousands of years." Seeing this, Official Nangua wanted to cry. He had no idea what was going to happen next. Long Fei Yi snorted disdainfully at Official Yu's actions. He looked towards Nangua Mingda and asked, "Official Nangua, don't you want to know where your lordship's grain came from?" Official Nangua wanted to know, but Official Yu wanted to know even more. Official Nangua feigned ignorance and said, "Most likely, you bought it with silver from the Disaster Relief Fund." Exactly so. Long Fei Yi said. Official Nangua and Official Yu were both flustered. They had no idea why His Highness Duke of Qin was asking such a question. Unexpectedly, Han Yunshi laughed. "Your Highness, if these grain were bought, then where's the grain from the imperial court? This concubine heard about it on the way here. Just then someone asked Your Highness where the grain went. This concubine can't figure it out. Official Yu is clearly in charge of the grain, so why are they asking about Your Highness?" Official Yu didn't even dare to raise his head to look at Han Yunshi. Official Nangua was also very quiet. The people were all listening, so none of the instigators from before dared to open their mouths. Where did the grain from the Disaster Relief Fund go? Long Fei Yi ordered, "Someone come, search the senior provincial official's estate. Don't let a single grain slip by." After all, Official Nangua had already declared that all the grain in the estate had been taken out. There was no more grain left, so if they found anything else. Chapter 386. Kind people were bullied just as kind horses were ridden. Sometimes, the more silent and patient you were, the more others would think you were easy to bully and reach for a yard after giving you an inch. But that wasn't always the case. Nangua Mingda and Official Yu had been putting on an act for so long, but the Duke of Qin had remained silent the entire time. Those two had really gotten carried away with the act and reached for a yard after getting an inch. Did they really think His Highness Duke of Qin was easy to bully? The consequences were unthinkable now, weren't they? Chu Shifeng had already led his men into the senior provincial official's estate to search. Everyone was waiting for him. Nangua Mingda's face was ghastly white as his entire body trembled. He stared fixedly at the gates, too nervous to speak. Although he was on the verge of despair, he still harbored a sliver of hope that the grain in the secret storehouse wouldn't be discovered. A long time passed, but Chu Shifeng still didn't come out. Nangua Mingda grew more and more hopeful. Perhaps he was lucky after all. The secret storehouse was hidden so well, and Chu Shifeng wasn't familiar with the estate at all. How could he find it? Another long while later, Chu Shifeng finally emerged. Everyone looked over at him. It was about time to find out whether or not there was any grain in the estate. Chu Shifeng glanced at Nangua Mingda and gave a snort. Nangua Mingda grew alarmed as he clenched his fists in his sleeves. But Chu Shifeng only reported, "Your Highness Duke of Qin, this subordinate didn't find any grain in the estate." "He didn't find anything?" Could it be that Nangua Mingda didn't embezzle any grain either? The crowd couldn't help but feel disappointed, but Nangua Mingda immediately relaxed. He knew it. It wouldn't be easy to find the secret storehouse. Finally, he'd escaped a calamity. But Chu Shifeng's next words were, "Your Highness, this subordinate didn't find anything, but Sir Nangua is willing to lead the way for you. According to him, the estate has a huge secret storehouse filled with grain." His words sent the crowd into an uproar. Chu Shifeng wasn't stupid enough to actually search the estate. All he did was threaten Nanguijun. Nanguijun was a man who looked strong on the outside but was weak on the inside. How could he stand up to threats? He'd spilled the beans in 2 or 3 sentences. Nangwa Mingda froze in place as if he'd been struck by lightning. He never expected his own son to betray him in the end. This was what it meant to be a scam. Long Fei Ye's lips curled into a mocking smile as he asked, "Lord Nangwa, didn't you say that there's no more food in the estate?" Nangwa Jun's words were the best evidence without even seeing the food in the secret storehouse. The surrounding commoners all began to angrily accuse His Highness Duke of Qin. Once again the rumors were overturned. Not only had His Highness Duke of Qin not embezzled the relief money, he hadn't embezzled the relief food either. Nangwa Mingda, the so-called parental official, was the biggest parasite. What did he say about taking out his mother's rations? That was a complete lie. Very soon, Chu Shifeng's guards carried out sack after sack of grain. Soon enough, they formed a small mountain by the gates. Han Yunxi frowned as she watched. How many elderly and children had starved to death in the disaster area? Yet these people had stockpiled so much food and waited for the price to rise. I really don't know why these people are so ruthless. This Nangwa Mingda, even dying 100 times wouldn't be enough to atone for his crimes. Nangwa Mingda remained kneeling amidst the angry curses of the crowd, his entire body trembling. He kept shooting glances at Official Yu, but the man couldn't even protect himself right now, much less Nangwa Mingda. Official Yu not only didn't protect Nangwa Mingda, but hit him while he was down. Nangwa Mingda, this official trusted you wrongly. I never expected you to be this kind of person. South Ning Prefecture suffered the most from the disaster and received the most grain. I never expected you to do such a thing. How can you face the common people? Official Yu asked sternly. Official Yu, Nangwa Mingda was about to explain himself when Official Yu beat him to it. Official Nangwa, you're also a man with an old mother and young grandchildren. How could you bear to see so many elderly and children starve to death? Just what is your heart made of? His words sounded good, but after careful consideration they felt a little strange. The bystanders didn't understand, but Nangwa Mingda knew full well that Official Yu was using his old mother and young grandchildren to blackmail him. He had the data on the actual grain that Official Yu had sent to South Ning Prefecture. Although he had embezzled, the grain that had been sent to South Ning Prefecture had already been embezzled once. Official Yu's intention was for him to shoulder all the blame and not implicate the people above him. Although Nangwa Mingda was unwilling, he had long known that if he couldn't overcome this disaster, he would be a pawn abandoned by his superiors and would die without a doubt. What else could he say? He pressed his forehead against the floor and fell completely silent. Your Highness Duke of Qin is wise to have caught such a large pest for the people of South Ning. This is truly a blessing for the common people. Official Yu switched to flattery. However, Long Fei Yi didn't even look at him. Coldly he said, Men, hang Nangwa Mingda at the city gates and starve him for 3 days and 3 nights. Embezzling grain from the disaster victims? Then let him have a taste of starvation. Although Nangwa Mingda had already accepted his fate, he was still afraid. He kowtowed and begged, Your Highness Duke of Qin, please spare me. Please spare me. This official won't dare do it again. Please spare me, Your Highness Duke of Qin. Long Fei was an intelligent man who'd grown up in a court filled with both open and covert struggles. He understood Official Yu's threat to Nangwa Mingda as soon as he heard it. He had plenty of ways to protect Nangwa Mingda's old mother and young grandson and force Nangwa Mingda to give up the exact amount of grain that had been sent to South Ning Prefecture. But he wasn't willing. Nangwa Mingda controlled South Ning Prefecture. Without his cooperation, how much could Official Yu and his superiors embezzle? Long Fei didn't like to give more chances to those who deserved it. He ignored Nangwa Mingda's pleas and said coldly, Men, take him away immediately. Your Highness Duke of Qin. Please spare me. Your Highness Duke of Qin, this official knows his wrongs. I know my wrongs. Nangwa Mingda's pleas were quickly drowned out by the cheers of the commoners. 2 guards carried him to the city gates. Someone threw a stone and the commoners all followed suit. Before Nangwa Mingda even reached the gates, he was already covered in injuries and bumps on his head. Nangwa Mingda truly regretted his actions. If he could, he would have rather offended the imperial uncle than offend His Highness Duke of Qin now. If he hadn't incited the commoners like that, would His Highness Duke of Qin have been more merciful? Fine, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Official Yu's back was drenched in cold sweat as he watched Nangwa Mingda's wretched figure disappear into the distance. He only rejoiced that Nangwa Mingda was sensible enough to not give up too much. He glanced at the mountains of grain around him and hurriedly tried to curry favor. Your Highness Duke of Qin, This official has detailed data on the disaster victims in South Ning. This official is willing to do everything in his power to help your highness distribute the grain. But Long Fei Yi still ignored him and treated him like air. Seeing this, official Yu didn't dare to speak again. His heart was filled with apprehension. The more His Highness Duke of Qin ignored him, the more uncertain he felt. He didn't believe that His Highness Duke of Qin would let him off so easily. Filled with fear and trepidation, he waited respectfully on the side, too afraid to leave. Long Fei Yi ordered, Chu Shifeng, make arrangements to distribute grain by county and village. Tell the people below that anyone who dares to embezzle, even if it's just a single grain, will meet the same fate as Nangua Mingda. Yes. Chu Shifeng obeyed and left. Such a large amount of grain would have to be distributed by the various Yamen officials. Long Fei didn't have enough men with him. With Nangua Mingda hanging at the city gate, not only would the people below not dare to act recklessly, but even the people above would be anxious. After the people dispersed, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi settled down at the South Ning Prefecture official's estate. Official Yu was 100 times unwilling, but he had no choice but to follow them inside. He really couldn't figure out where His Highness Duke of Qin had found so much grain. Of course, he didn't have time to worry about that now. He silently told himself that no matter how His Highness Duke of Qin interrogated him, he had to hold on. He couldn't reveal the true amount of grain. For better or worse, he was a fourth-rank official in the Ministry of Revenue and had the imperial uncle's support. He was also the emperor's personal ambassador for grain distribution. As long as His Highness Duke of Qin didn't find the true amount of grain, he couldn't do anything to him. But reality soon proved that official Yu had underestimated His Highness Duke of Qin. His Highness Duke of Qin didn't even ask for the exact amount of grain, but issued orders. As the ambassador for grain distribution, Yu Guangfu allowed the South Ning Prefecture official to embezzle grain. He didn't report what he knew, so his crime is 3 levels higher. Someone come, take Yu Guangfu to jail. Your lordship wants to interrogate him personally. Yu Guangfu was stunned by his words. He never expected His Highness Duke of Qin to accuse him of such a crime. Your Highness, this official has been wrongly accused. This official just arrived at South Ning Prefecture as well, so I didn't know the situation here. Official Yu tried to explain himself. Long Fei Yi laughed coldly. Then where were you before? This official was in Longxi Prefecture. Yu Guangfu replied hastily. Longxi Prefecture has even less grain in their hands than South Ning Prefecture. Plenty of their corpses have been exposed in the middle of the night. 2 riots have already broken out in Longxi Prefecture. Do you think your lordship doesn't know a thing? Long Fei retorted. Official Yu was so alarmed that he fell to his knees. Your Highness, this official only made an accurate assessment of the situation and gave out grain. As for where it went, this official really... His Majesty only gave this official the responsibility of distributing grain. That's not part of this official's duties. He actually pushed Emperor Tianhui into the picture? Long Fei's eyes flickered with disdain before he gave a cold snort. Your lordship isn't investigating the unequal distribution of grain, but the fact that you didn't report it. Someone come, hurry and take him away. Your Highness Duke of Qin, this official didn't know anything about the situation. Your Highness Duke of Qin, this official is His Majesty's personal envoy. You can't, Your Highness Duke of Qin, no matter how official you tried to explain himself or beg for mercy, Long Fei remained indifferent, even when he brought up Emperor Tianhui again. Since he was already in the disaster areas, he had the final say in everything. He waved a hand and indicated for the guards to take the man away. Han Yunxi couldn't help but burst into laughter as she watched official Yu struggle to leave. What are you laughing at? Long Fei asked. Chapter 387. You're laughing at His Highness for forcing a confession out of him, Han Yunxi said with a grin. Official Yu didn't just control the amount of grain sent to South Ning Prefecture. There were 2 other disaster areas as well. The difference between the amount on the books and the amount Long Fei had personally investigated was the most direct evidence of corruption. Things had already gotten to this point. With Long Fei's personality, how could he have the patience to waste time investigating? Since he'd captured official Yu, he'd naturally forced the truth out of his mouth. Forcing a confession out of him wasn't a good phrase, but Long Fei didn't get angry. Instead he asked, do you have any good methods? Han Yunxi was amused. Your Highness, you found the right person. Han Yunshi had plenty of poisons in her hands that could make people wish they were dead. When the attendants on the side heard the couple's conversation, they suddenly felt like they were colluding with each other. His Highness Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei aren't good people. It's best not to offend them. For the next few days, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi stayed at the senior provincial official's estate, keeping an eye on the distribution of grain while slowly tormenting official Yu. During these days, the other two disaster areas began to send grain as well. News of South Ning Prefecture's governor being hung at the city gates spread to the other two prefectures as well. The loyal officials applauded and cheered, while the corrupt officials trembled with fear. They came up with all sorts of excuses to spit out the grain they'd eaten, afraid that they'd end up worse than Nangwamingda if they didn't do it in time. According to estimates, His Highness Duke of Qin's grain, combined with the grain the corrupt officials spat out, was enough to keep the disaster areas safe for a month and a half. Long Fei Yi had no plans to visit the other two prefectures, nor did he have time to spare for the minor officials. His eyes were fixed on the man at the very top. Within a few days, news of the grain distribution had spread all over the country. The rumors of His Highness Duke of Qin's corruption were dispelled on their own. The more popular the rumors were, the more sensational the praises were. The Duke of Qin's disaster relief had become Tianning country's #1 event. News of it had even spread outside the country. His Highness Duke of Qin's reputation was already resounding, and this time, it caused another stir. The disaster relief wasn't over yet, but His Highness Duke of Qin had already won the hearts of the people. The imperial uncle was the first to receive the news. He slumped in front of his desk, unable to move for a long time. If the imperial uncle still couldn't figure out where the Long Fei Yi had gotten so much food at this point, then he might as well not be the imperial uncle anymore. Scam. This was simply a trap. It had been a trap since the charity auction began. Not only was he cheated of his money, but he was also cheated of his food. This blow was just too great. The price he had to pay for coming to his senses was just too painful. The imperial uncle sat in a daze for a long time before he suddenly came to his senses and shouted, "Someone, go get Chen Rong for old man quick." Since Long Fei Yi was able to buy grain from the black market, it meant that he knew that the Lin clan's grain store was under the imperial uncle's control. The imperial uncle's residence had never had direct contact with the Lin clan's grain store. Even a secret letter had to be passed through several hands. Back then, the imperial uncle was in a hurry to cash in on the black market, so he left everything to Chen Rong and had him handle the negotiations. Later on, Chen Rong even brought the two sellers to the warehouse to transport the grain. Now that he thought about it, the imperial uncle finally understood and regretted it. Unfortunately, it was already too late. If the Long Fei Yi found any clues from Chen Rong and traced them back to the imperial uncle's residence, then everything would be over. Reporting to Master, Chen Rong isn't in the residence, an attendant quickly reported. Then where did he go? The imperial uncle cried out in alarm. This subordinate doesn't know. I heard from my subordinates that they haven't seen him in several days, the attendant replied truthfully. The imperial uncle's face paled. Find him. Immediately find old man. The next night, the guards who'd gone out to search for Chen Rong returned with confirmed news. Chen Rong had gone missing. There was no news of him, not even from his hometown. The imperial uncle was completely flustered. He immediately ordered the imperial uncle to sever all ties with the Lin clan's grain store and secretly destroyed all the mouths of the Lin clan's grain store. Someone go to the Yu estate and bring Yu Guangfu's wife and children here. Quickly. The imperial uncle hurriedly ordered. Unfortunately, it was too late. The Yu clan had already fallen under the Long Fei Ye's control as soon as he left the capital. How could the honorable Duke of Qin fight a battle he wasn't confident in winning? The imperial uncle was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan, but his nephew, the crown prince, whom he fully supported, was laughing at him behind his back. It had to be said that this was a kind of irony. Before long, Tianmo received the news. He said to Mu Qinggu, "Young general, it's fortunate that the betrothal gifts were all used for disaster relief. Otherwise, once the imperial uncle's residence fell, the general's residence wouldn't be able to escape the curses of public opinion." A complicated look flitted through Mu Qingwu's eyes, but he didn't reply. He'd chosen to side with the crown prince precisely because he wanted to use this opportunity to infiltrate the imperial uncle's residence and uncover the dark secrets of corruption. However, as he grew closer and closer to Long Tianma, he discovered that the crown prince was more resentful than anyone else about the imperial uncle's corruption. The imperial uncle was also wary of the crown prince, so he didn't let him know much about the disaster relief. Young general, I'm sure the great general will be much more relieved now, Long Tianma asked. His marriage to Mu Luiyue had been arranged by Mu Qinggu. The great general had always been neutral and didn't have a good impression of the imperial uncle's residence. He'd originally been vehemently opposed to this marriage, but he'd only reluctantly agreed because he couldn't persuade Mu Luiyue otherwise. Now that the imperial uncle's residence was about to fall, perhaps the great general would no longer have any misgivings and wholeheartedly support his son-in-law? Mu Qinggu hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke. Your Highness Crown Prince, the imperial uncle's residence has deep roots. Rome wasn't built in a single day. Hearing this, Long Tianmo rejoiced. He'd been beating around the bush time and time again, but Mu Qinggu had finally given him a direct answer. He knew that the great general's residence wouldn't be interested in such a meager betrothal gift. How could his position be affected by the marriage of his daughter who had been abolished? Old General Mu probably already knew which side the great general's residence would support. I'm just worried that imperial father and imperial grandmother won't be easy to talk to, so I'll have to ask old General Mu to make a trip to the palace, Long Tianma said in a low voice. The imperial uncle's residence truly had a special status. Even if His Highness Duke of Qin managed to find concrete evidence, the great general's imperial father would be the one to convict him in the end. Actually, imperial father had long known about the imperial uncle's corruption, but he'd always turned a blind eye to it. After all, a single move against the imperial uncle's estate would affect the rest as well. Right now, the power balance in the imperial court was still balanced, so imperial father wouldn't make any rash moves against either side. But if General Mu could make a personal trip to the palace and express his determination to support the Eastern Palace, then everything would be different. With the support of the general's estate, the Eastern Palace would gain a firm foothold in the imperial court. As for the imperial uncle's estate, imperial father could seize the chance to get rid of them. Mu Qinggu thought that he'd taken a risk this time. Although he hadn't been able to find any evidence of the imperial uncle's corruption, he could at least help out in this matter. Seeing the sincere look in the Crown Prince's eyes, he secretly rejoiced that he'd chosen the right path. Your Highness, this soldier will go back immediately and convince father. The Empress Dowager still. Before Mu Qinggu could finish, Long Tianma patted his chest and promised, Empress Dowager, leave it to this Crown Prince. You can set your mind at ease. Emperor Tianhui had received the news even before the imperial uncle's estate. He'd shut himself in his study and refused to see anyone. Your Majesty, His Highness Crown Prince has already been waiting by the door for a long time, Eunuch Luo reported in a low voice. Didn't I say Zhen wouldn't see anyone? Emperor Tianhui clenched his fists and slammed them against the secret missive on the table, his brows furrowed in irritation. His Highness says he has something very important to discuss. He has to see Your Majesty, Eunuch Luo ventured to report. Pass down orders. Zhen's body is unwell, so court will be adjourned for 3 days. However, if there are any urgent memorials to send to the heart-nurturing pavilion, the Crown Prince will take care of everything else. Emperor Tianhui waved his hand impatiently before rising to his feet and heading for the heart-nurturing pavilion. The disaster areas hadn't even ended yet, but the Duke of Qin had already won the hearts of the people. How could he be content with that? With such a huge commotion in the disaster areas, it was only a matter of time before something happened to the imperial uncle's estate. Over the past few days, both the Crown Prince and the civil and military officials in court had been writing memorials to either defend the imperial uncle's estate or kick him while he was down. Even an emperor like him had his moments of difficulty making decisions. The imperial uncle's estate had many friends and powerful supporters in court. Emperor Tianhui had a love-hate relationship with them. He wanted to get rid of them quickly but also make full use of them. Unfortunately, it wasn't time yet. The Duke of Qin was truly abominable. He'd only been in the disaster areas for less than 10 days, but he'd already caused so much trouble for Emperor Tianhui. Of course, that wasn't Emperor Tianhui's biggest headache. Right now he was thinking of a way to strike back at the Duke of Qin. After all, the disaster areas weren't over yet. If he let the Duke of Qin get away so easily, then the people would only know him as Tianning's Duke of Qin in the future, but not Emperor Tianhui. Eunuch Luo had followed him closely so he could more or less guess at Emperor Tianhui's thoughts. Your Majesty, it's still early winter. True winter hasn't arrived yet. If they wanted new crops, they'd have to wait until spring at the latest and harvest them in the summer. There was still a long way to go before the disaster areas. Eunuch Luo had hit the nail on the head, but Emperor Tianhui was too distracted to listen. He glared at Eunuch Luo and snapped, "Get lost." Frightened, Eunuch Luo quickly backed away, but Long Qinma blocked his way as soon as he reached the door to the imperial study. "Eunuch Luo, is Imperial Father really ill?" Long Qinma asked doubtfully. "Your Highness Crown Prince, His Majesty's body isn't well. You should go back," Eunuch Luo coaxed. "Did he summon Imperial Physician Gu?" Long Qinma asked next. "Only an Imperial Physician could speak with his Imperial Father at a time like this. Your Highness, His Majesty hasn't summoned an Imperial Physician yet, but it definitely can't be Imperial Physician Gu. He took sick leave a month ago and went back to his hometown." "He won't be back so soon," Eunuch Luo replied honestly. "He took such a long leave." Long Qinma was doubtful but didn't think much of it. After all, he was just an Imperial Physician. Currently, Han Yunxi was far away in South Ning Prefecture, treating Long Fei Ye's wounds. The two of them happened to mention Gu Beiyue. "I heard that Gu Beiyue took sick leave and went back to his hometown?" Long Fei Yi rarely brought up the name in front of Han Yunxi. "Really? Who did your Highness hear that from?" Han Yunxi grew doubtful. They'd been out for over a month now, so why was this fellow still asking about Gu Beiyue's whereabouts? Chapter 388. Han Yunxi was wondering why Long Fei Yi was suddenly concerned about Gu Beiyue, but Long Fei Yi didn't answer her question. Instead he asked, "Does Gu Beiyue have a hometown?" Han Yunxi shook her head. "I'm not sure." Han Yunxi had always thought she understood Gu Beiyue well, but now that she thought about it, she realized she didn't know as much about Gu Beiyue as she'd imagined. She only knew that Gu Beiyue's grandfather was the previous head of the Imperial Physician Courtyard in Tianing Country. He was also one of the directors of Medical City and had a great reputation in the city. Later on, when he became the head of the Imperial Physician Courtyard in Tianing Country, he brought Gu Beiyue with him. After grandfather Gu passed away, Gu Beiyue inherited his mantle and became the youngest head of the Imperial Physician Courtyard in Tianing Country. "Does he still have people in his hometown?" Long Fei Yi asked again. Han Yunxi still shook her head. "I've never heard him mention his parents, so I don't know where his hometown is." "Does he have brothers or sisters?" Long Fei Yi asked again. Han Yunxi still didn't know. She looked suspiciously at Long Fei Yi. "Your Highness, why are you suddenly asking about these things? The Emperor took a few days off and didn't attend court. I originally thought Gu Beiyue would be the one to serve him," Long Fei Yi explained mildly. This explanation made everything seem natural and not so deliberate. But as smart as Han Yunxi was, she still smelled the scent of suspicion and even a bit of hostility. If Long Fei Yi was still jealous of what happened last time, Han Yunxi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But if Long Fei Yi was objectively suspecting Gu Beiyue's origins, then this was a question worth pondering. "The little thing is still with him. He won't kidnap the little thing and not come back, right?" Han Yunxi joked. "You gave the poison beast to him?" Long Fei Yi was very surprised. If the little thing saw Long Fei Yi's current expression, it would probably cry. When it was around, it was thrown out of the window every day. Now that it was gone, His Highness Duke of Qin seemed unhappy. "Sigh, this man is so hard to please." "Your Highness, Imperial Physician Gu Beiyue is still trustworthy." Han Yunxi took the opportunity to speak up for Gu Beiyue half-jokingly. Long Fei Yi did not say much. He only said indifferently, "Remove the gauze." Under Han Yunxi's more than a month of meticulous care, Long Fei Ye's wound had basically healed. Han Yunxi did not say much. She took out a small tool and disinfectant. Just as she was about to cut open the gauze, Long Fei Yi casually said, "This prince thought that it would take at least 2 months for it to heal. Gu Beiyue is truly worthy of being the head imperial physician. That is the imperial physician's blessing." Han Yunxi looked calm, but her heart was a bit chaotic. She originally thought that Long Fei Yi did not understand medicine and would not suspect so much. She didn't expect that in the end she couldn't escape his eyes. The wound on Long Fei Yi's chest should have taken several months to heal. Now it had basically healed in a little more than a month. Moreover, during this month, Long Fei Yi often did not listen to warnings and acted recklessly. Long Fei Yi's body had a good foundation and strong self-healing ability. The effectiveness of the medicine she had on hand was mostly a factor. However, the most important factor was that Long Fei Yi was treated by Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue said that if Long Fei Yi did not wake up that night, he might become a vegetable. However, reality proved that Long Fei Yi could wake up a few days later. Gu Beiyue said that Long Fei Yi's wound had to be bandaged every day for a month. He could not act recklessly and could not use his martial arts. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, Long Fei-yi moved around a lot during this month, but he was still fine. If the person who treated Long Fei-yi was not Gu Beiyue, he would definitely be treated as a quack doctor. However, the person who treated Long Fei-yi was Gu Beiyue himself. Either Long Fei-yi's body was too special, or Gu Beiyue's medical skills were extremely high. Now it seemed that it was the latter. Therefore, Gu Beiyue actually deliberately concealed his medical skills. Han Yunxi quickly came back to her senses and continued what she was doing. She cut open the gauze and unraveled it. Even though she knew that the wound had already healed, she was still very careful. She was afraid that she would hurt Long Fei-yi. Should this prince send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it to Imperial Physician Gu's hometown to thank him for saving my life? Long Fei-yi suddenly said. At this time, Han Yunxi could no longer remain calm. It had always been other people who sent generous gifts to His Highness Duke of Qin. His Highness Duke of Qin had never sent anyone a generous gift before. If the Duke of Qin wanted to send Gu Beiyue a generous gift, it wouldn't be considered a gift. It would be more like a reward. There would be procedures to go through. Once the cumbersome reward process began, they would first have to go to the Imperial Physician Hospital to find out the whereabouts of Imperial Physician Gu's hometown. Then they would have to find Gu Beiyue. If they couldn't find Gu Beiyue, not sending the reward was a small matter. However, lying to the monarch and asking for sick leave was a big matter. Long Fei-yi, this rascal, was clearly testing Gu Beiyue. Your Highness, how could a mere generous gift be enough to repay the debt of saving your life? As soon as Han Yunxi finished speaking, Long Fei-yi raised his brows and looked over. She hurriedly added, Gu Beiyue is an imperial physician. Treating your Highness is part of his duty. There's no debt of gratitude to speak of. He should be thanking the heavens and earth that he didn't cause your Highness to fall ill. As for the reward, this concubine thinks it's better to forget about it. Han Yunxi's words were so bureaucratic and beautiful, but the actual meaning was, Long Fei-yi, Long Fei-yi, although Gu Beiyue is suspicious, he didn't try to kill you when your life was in danger. At the very least, he's not your enemy. You should spare him whenever possible. Long Fei-yi looked at Han Yunxi for a long time before saying, You haven't improved, but your mouth has improved a lot. Your Highness is too kind. Han Yunxi didn't dare to look at Long Fei-yi. She lowered her head and pretended to be very serious as she continued to treat the wound. Long Fei-yi didn't have the heart to send the generous gift. As for whether he continued to investigate Gu Beiyue behind the scenes, only he knew. After calming down, Long Fei-yi relaxed and lay down, closing his eyes. Han Yunxi's attention quickly focused on Long Fei-yi's wound. In front of Long Fei-yi's matter, no matter who it was, they couldn't easily disturb her heart and steal her attention. It was quiet inside the house and it was also quiet outside. The night was cold and the north wind was gradually getting stronger. The white-clothed man stood outside the unlatched window. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, as if no one and nothing could ever break this Ningjing that came from the depths of his heart. Seeing that Han Yunxi had completely removed the gauze, he seemed to have no interest in the recovery of the wound. He turned his head and quietly disappeared into the night. The gauze on Long Fei-yi's wound was completely removed. Because of a month of bandaging, the large patch of skin over his heart was much paler. There were bits and pieces of greenish-black medicine residue scattered over it. There was a scar that was more than an inch long near his heart. It looked somewhat sinister under the pale skin. The scar was a memory that the body left for its owner. Han Yunxi looked at the scar and recalled everything that had happened in the U prison. Then she looked at Long Fei-yi's handsome face that was as cold and silent as ever. Her heart still felt afraid. Long Fei-yi, thank goodness you're still alive in this world. When nothing happened, Long Fei-yi opened his eyes. What's wrong? It's nothing. I'm just letting the wound breathe. As Han Yunxi explained, she took care of the dregs of the medicine and disinfected them. Then everything was settled. She hadn't even put on her clothes when Chu Shifeng rushed in. Your Highness. Chu Shifeng was holding a secret missive in his hands, as if he had something urgent to discuss. But Long Fei-yi didn't panic. He didn't say a word, but waved a hand to indicate that he should withdraw. Chu Shifeng saw the scene on the bed and knew that esteemed Wang Fei was treating his master's wounds. Still, he only coughed twice before withdrawing from the room. It made Han Yunxi feel like she'd been caught in a thief's trap. Long Fei-yi was calm and said lazily, Help me change my clothes. Then he got off the bed and spread his arms. His wound was already healed, but he still needed someone to help him? It had to be said that Han Yunxi had no ambition at all. She didn't fuss over the matter but secretly rejoiced. She didn't laugh out loud but it was written all over her face. She took out Long Fei's clean, pure white undergarments and loose, soft purple robes and helped him put them on. Although she hadn't had many chances to change his clothes in the past month, she still had plenty of practice, so she was quite experienced at it. Dressing him, arranging his collar, cuffs, belt and jade pendants were all done in 2 or 3 moves. If her second skill apart from poison was to help this guy change his clothes, would she be despised by some people? But Han Yunxi was happy and willing to do so. Who cared what others said as long as she was happy? She wouldn't admit to being a masculine woman, nor would she admit to being a little woman. She was herself Han Yunxi. Once she was dressed, Han Yunxi mimicked the servant girls and bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, may I summon Guard Chu now?" Long Fei Yi gave a start but didn't say anything. Instead, he smoothed out her bangs and walked out himself. Han Yunxi absolutely adored his actions. She rubbed her own face and tidied herself up before following him out. "Your Highness, there's news from the capital. Qian Rong and the movers in the storehouses can all prove that the grain we bought came from the imperial uncle's estate." Chu Shifeng had brought good news. All of Tianning was praising Long Fei Ye's glorious achievements while discussing where he'd found so much grain. Naturally, he had to give everyone an explanation. Of course, he wouldn't give the answer himself, but let the imperial uncle do it. "Is there anything else official you hasn't said?" Long Fei Yi asked. Han Yunxi replied with 2 words. "Last words." Chu Shifeng almost burst out laughing. Yesterday he'd gone to visit Official Yu in the provincial guard's prison cells. Official Yu was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, second only to the Minister of Revenue. He held great power over the finances and was notoriously difficult to deal with in court. He had no idea how esteemed Wang Fei had tormented him, but the man was completely docile. Even when he saw a guard like Chu Shifeng, he was respectful and answered all of Chu Shifeng's questions. Most miraculously, Official Yu didn't have a single injury on his body. It was impossible to tell that he'd been tortured into confessing. Chapter 389. Official Yu really only had last words left to speak of. Over the past few days, Han Yunxi had long gotten information from him about the amount of grain that the imperial court had sent to the 3 disaster regions, as well as the actual amount that had reached them. As luck would have it, the difference was about the same as the grain they'd bought from the imperial uncle's estate. Han Yunxi didn't ask Official Yu who'd embezzled the grain either. All she needed to do was give Official Yu's signed testimony to Emperor Tianhui, then report the imperial uncle's relationship with the Lin clan's grain store. Everything would be up to the imperial uncle to explain himself. Perhaps he'd even come up with some interesting and preposterous explanations. Of course, Long Fei Yi wasn't stupid enough to hand over the memorial himself. If Long Fei handed over the memorial directly, then only Emperor Tianhui would be able to see all the evidence. The imperial uncle was a man of great power and influence after all, so Emperor Tianhui might not punish him. But if he borrowed someone else's hands, then things would be different. Han Yunxi had always assumed that Long Fei Yi would borrow the crown prince's hand. Long Fei Yi was well aware of the crown prince's personality and grudge against the imperial uncle's estate. But Long Fei Yi only said, "Chu Shifeng, organize all the evidence and give it to General Mu." General Mu. Han Yunxi was stunned. She never thought that General Mu could be used as well. General Mu wasn't marrying off his daughter for the sake of betrothal gifts, but so that she'd have a good home to return to. Although he was despicable, General Mu had no choice but to do so. Pity the hearts of all parents in the world. If General Mu was given a chance to topple the imperial uncle's estate and cut off all ties between the crown prince and his estate, then the crown prince's name would be clean and the Mu clan wouldn't be cursed by anyone. This was giving General Mu a chance, as well as a huge favor from His Highness Duke of Qin. Even if General Mu's estate was truly loyal to the crown prince, they wouldn't dare to openly oppose the Duke of Qin's estate. "Your Highness, the spies have reported that Mu Qingwu has been very close to the crown prince recently," Chu Shifeng replied in a low voice. Although they were far away from the capital, none of their movements could escape His Highness Duke of Qin's eyes. Long Qianma was trained by Tianhui after all. How stupid could he be? It was hard to tell whether Long Fei Ye's words were praise or mockery. Even if Long Qianma could convince the general to lobby Emperor Tianhui, he'd still need proof. Strictly speaking, the Duke of Qin had helped Long Qianma a lot. If he didn't cut ties with the imperial uncle's estate, Long Qianma wouldn't be able to go far. Han Yunxi remained silent as she listened. She couldn't help but recall the first time Mu Qingwu had come to the Duke of Qin's manor to thank her for saving his life. He'd been such an upright man of iron with thick eyebrows and large eyes. His eyes were bright and full of expression, and his every movement was standard military posture. He was methodical and full of vigor. The imperial uncle's estate was about to fall from power, so this man had escaped the fate of wallowing in the mire. But in the end, he'd chosen to stand on the crown prince's side. Mu Qingwu, was it worth it for you to choose the crown prince and give up on the Duke of Qin for the sake of a good-for-nothing little sister's marriage? Many years later, Han Yunshi would find out that Mu Qingwu hadn't chosen the crown prince or the Duke of Qin but her. There were some things that even the smartest person couldn't see through. That was because some things could be done with the heart, not the brain. It was hard to guess the human heart. Chu Shifeng organized the evidence and personally escorted official Yu back to the capital with Nangua Mingda, who was on his last breath. Everything was packed into a large wooden chest and transported to the courtyard of the general's estate. General Mu, this is His Highness Duke of Qin's gift for you from the disaster areas. Please kindly accept it, Chu Shifeng said respectfully. I don't dare accept. General Mu quickly bowed with hands clasped in front. Even a great general like Tiger had to admit defeat before the Duke of Qin's might. The political situation was changing and public opinion was turning the skies upside down. General Mu had lived in seclusion ever since Mu Liuyue's wedding, but he still kept an eye on the situation. He never guessed that the Duke of Qin would send him a gift, but he could guess what it was. This soldier thanks your highness for the gift. Please pass it on for me, Guard Chu. I will. Take care of the things. This one will take his leave, Chu Shifeng said before leaving. A few days later, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi received a messenger pigeon in the distant disaster areas. The situation in the capital had changed drastically. Emperor Tianhui was still recuperating from his illness, so General Mu brought young General Mu Qingwu and a dozen or so court officials to kneel before the palace gates and plead for mercy on behalf of the disaster victims. They accused the imperial uncle Li Shirong of bribing official Yu of the Ministry of Revenue and bribing officials, as well as colluding with the powers of the black market to embezzle the disaster relief supplies. In the end, Emperor Tianhui received an audience despite his illness. He ordered the Crown Prince to be the judge and the Ministry of Justice to cooperate fully to investigate the case. Apparently, because Emperor Tianhui put the Crown Prince in charge of the case, the Empress Dowager had caused a ruckus at Yangxin Palace for 3 days and 3 nights. Emperor Tianhui had no choice but to hide. Now that things had gotten to this point, what else could Emperor Tianhui do? He could only borrow the momentum to push the Crown Prince forward and make him look like a man who placed righteousness above family. Less than half a month later, the entire case was revealed with irrefutable evidence. The imperial uncle was stripped of his title of duke and demoted to a commoner. Half of his family's property was confiscated, and he plummeted from his lofty perch into the mud. If this case hadn't been tried and judged by the Crown Prince, then perhaps the imperial uncle wouldn't have ended up in such a miserable state. He would have lost his position as duke and his family's fortune, but this time the imperial uncle lost the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was the imperial uncle's future, but he'd already lost it. Who else in the court dared to associate with him or form an alliance with him? Instead, it was the neutral General Mu's estate that replaced the imperial uncles as the center of power. Mu Liuyue's loss of face at the wedding was finally redeemed this time. It was also at this moment that General Mu became the Crown Prince's true backer. Emperor Tianhui stood on the roof of a tall building overlooking the capital city. Eunuch Luo, this result can be considered as Tianma getting a share of the action. Emperor Tianhui was quite satisfied with the results. At least General Mu and the Crown Prince had won over the hearts of the people, especially the Crown Prince. This was the first time he'd risen to prominence after recovering from his illness. Your Majesty, your heart still loves His Highness Crown Prince, Eunuch Luo chuckled. How could Eunuch Luo know the depth of the situation? He was only saying pleasing words. Emperor Tianhui only smiled without a word. A son inheriting his father's legacy was the same, even for the throne. As an emperor, he was very clear that his best choice was the Crown Prince. Currently, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi had climbed to the top of South Ning Prefecture's tallest mountain and were looking towards the north. Your Highness, you're single-handedly cultivating the Crown Prince into a formidable opponent, Han Yunshi grinned. First, your lordship has to cultivate him into a formidable opponent for Tianhui. Long Fei Yi was very direct. Compared to Emperor Tianhui, Long Fei Ye's imperial uncle understood Long Tianma better. Emperor Tianhui must have forgotten how cruel he'd been to Long Qianmo in the past, but Long Feiyi remembered. Long Qianmo remembered even more. Emperor Tianhui had never imagined that the crown prince's rise to power today would mark the beginning of the end of his imperial career. Looking at Long Feiyi's indifferent profile and silent eyes, Han Yunshi thought of a saying, strategizing within the tent can lead to absolute victory thousands of li away. The man by her side had the power to take Tianning's throne, but he was so indifferent. He'd only kill people when they provoked him. Aside from that, he preferred things to be in a state of balance. She knew he didn't just want Tianning, but it was a good thing to take it down first. Why wasn't he making a move? She couldn't help but feel that he was waiting for something. Just what was it? Did it have anything to do with the perplexing butterfly illusion in her hands? Han Yunshi couldn't help but yawn as the cold wind blew against her face. Long Feiyi immediately took off his cloak and covered it with hers before pulling her into his arms. Stand with your lordship for a while longer. Han Yunshi murmured. At this moment, Chu Shifeng suddenly descended in a hurry, as if he had something to report. But he held back and said, Your Highness, it's windy here. It's better to go back. Han Yunshi was still lost in her thoughts and didn't notice Chu Shifeng's strange behavior. Long Feiyi glanced at Chu Shifeng before descending the mountain. Back at the senior provincial official's estate, Han Yunshi went to get more clothes. It was getting colder and colder. As soon as she left, Chu Shifeng rushed to report, Your Highness, that person from the hidden pavilion woke up. Something's happened. That person from the hidden pavilion referred to the mysterious person imprisoned there. Last time, she'd been badly frightened by the black-robed men and hit her head. She'd been unconscious until now but had finally woken up. Long Fei looked at him coldly, his gaze clearly questioning. After the black-robed men discovered the hidden pavilion, the mysterious person hadn't stayed put. Tang Li had only been guarding the place as a bait to lure the black-robed man out. They'd long brought the mysterious person to the disaster areas and locked her up near South Ning Prefecture. Chu Shifeng had sent people to keep an eye on her. Your Highness, this subordinate didn't do a thing. That person insisted on leaving and even tried to force the guards to let her go, Chu Shifeng reported. She'd been like this when she was imprisoned at the hidden pavilion, but things had calmed down later. Perhaps the kidnapping and the change of environment had given her a fright. Long Feiyi took out a painting from his sleeve. Give it to her. But before Chu Shifeng could take it, he withdrew it again. Your lordship will go personally. He was going to have a good chat with her sooner or later, so it was time for him to pay her a visit. Your Highness, I don't think that's a good idea. What if esteemed Wang Fei suspects? Chu Shifeng grew timid. If esteemed Wang Fei found out about this, she'd probably turn the heavens upside down. Just keep your mouth shut, Long Fei said coldly. Chu Shifeng was still very nervous. After all, this wasn't a small matter, nor was it a big deal. Your Highness, what if esteemed Wang Fei asks where you went? Chu Shifeng asked next. Long Feiyi didn't answer but simply left. Chu Shifeng hesitated for a long time before following after him. If esteemed Wang Fei can't find me, then there's no need to lie. Long Feiyi arrived at an abandoned courtyard on the outskirts of the city when all the guards appeared. He gestured for them to withdraw and personally open the door. Who could be imprisoned inside? Chapter 390. Squeak. Long Fei personally pushed open the gates to the courtyard, disturbing the silence of the courtyard and startling all the birds that were perching there. Long Feiyi went inside and closed the gates himself. By the time Chu Shifeng arrived, it was already too late to enter. As soon as Chu Shifeng arrived, a few guards appeared as well. Boss, why did His Highness come in person? Boss, just who's locked up inside? Everything's been so secretive the entire time. Could it be, it's not a person? Boss, to be honest, we've been with you for so many years. Don't you trust us? Why can't we know if Li Xiaoxi knows? Chu Shifeng was used to letting the guards complain, but now he knitted his brows and said coldly, Trust? Can your mouths be tighter than a dead man's? Everyone fell silent at his words. Dead people's mouths were the tightest. Without a doubt, Li Xiaoxi wouldn't live for long. I can't even ask about His Highness's matters, much less you lot. All of you behave yourselves. Chu Shifeng said before jumping onto the wall to stand guard. Once the crows and magpies had all flown away, the courtyard returned to silence. But no matter what happened, it had nothing to do with that person. She couldn't hear a thing. She was currently standing by the wall, two sharp stones in her hands. She was chiseling away at them, but her strength was limited. She couldn't make a dent no matter how long she tried. Her emotions were agitated, her face stern as she gritted her teeth. She was as stubborn as an ox. Long Fei-yi had already walked up behind her, but she still didn't realize. Long Fei-yi looked her up and down with cold eyes before asking, "Who gave her the stones?" Li Xiaoxi, who was standing guard on the side, immediately appeared and reported, "Your Highness, she asked for it herself. As soon as this subordinate took it away, she tried to kill herself. This subordinate could only let her be. Useless thing." Long Fei-yi glanced sideways, causing Li Xiaoxi to shiver. He instinctively wanted to retreat, but it was already too late. Long Fei-yi's sword was so fast that Li Xiaoxi did not even notice the movement of his sword. When he came back to his senses, he saw the blood splattering from his abdomen. Long Fei-yi put his sword back into its scabbard. Li Xiaoxi fell to the ground. Such a big movement happened behind the wall chisel. Unfortunately, she still did not know. Long Fei-yi had tried countless times to sound her out, but she really couldn't hear anything. This time it was not a test, and Li Xiaoxi was not the first shadow guard he had killed. In order to protect this secret, he had already replaced 5 to 6 secret guards along the way. "Chu Shifeng, clean up the mess," Long Fei-yi said before entering the rooms. Chu Shifeng assumed that His Highness would talk to the person himself, but His Highness allowed her to keep chipping away at the wall. He couldn't figure it out, but he didn't dare to ask more. He personally disposed of Li Xiaoxi's body. He had followed His Highness for so many years, but this was the first time he had seen His Highness so carefully guarding a secret. His Highness was not even this careful when it came to protecting his own life. He knew that this secret didn't belong to the person imprisoned here, but to this person herself. Currently, Han Yunxi had long changed her clothes and returned to the guest hall, but Long Fei-yi was nowhere to be seen. She searched the entire hall but didn't see Long Fei-yi anywhere. Where was he? Su Donglin. Han Yunxi gave the order, and the little guard Su Donglin appeared. As soon as they left the black market, Long Fei-yi had given him to Han Yunxi as an attendant. "Where's His Highness?" Han Yunxi asked. "I didn't see him, but I did see our boss leave for the southern outskirts," Su Donglin replied honestly. Han Yunxi was puzzled. It looked like Long Fei-yi had gone out. Was it an emergency? Over the past month, she had gone down south with Long Fei-yi to provide disaster relief. They had spent more time together than they had in the past year combined. Although Long Fei-yi had never purposely told her where he was going, she knew every time he went out to do something. Where did he go this time? What was he doing? Was he looking for food? The imperial uncle's estate had already fallen, but the disaster relief was still going on. The food they had sent down was only barely enough to help the victims survive this winter. The coming spring would be the most difficult time. They still had to think of a way to find food. Han Yunxi thought about it for a while before deciding to change her clothes. If Long Fei-yi was in a rush to find food, then even if he didn't wait for her, he would have given her a heads up. Could it be a private matter? The people from the Tang sect are here again? Han Yunxi muttered to herself. "Esteemed Wang Fei, what are you saying?" Su Donglin timidly asked. "Nothing, just pass on the meal," Han Yunxi mused. Habits really are scary. By the time they returned to the capital, Long Fei-yi would be so busy that she wouldn't be able to get used to it. Han Yunxi stood alone by the door, staring at the clear skies. It wasn't clear what she was thinking, but her thoughts soon wandered off. Abruptly, a warm voice spoke up from behind her. "Miss Yunxi, long time no see. May I have a cup of tea to drink?" Han Yunxi jumped in fright and spun around, only to see the white-robed, masked gentleman she'd met at the sky pit. He was sitting by the tea table and had already steeped a cup of tea. Han Yunxi quickly ran inside and shut the door. How did you?" Han Yunxi was both frightened and moved at the same time. "Miss Yunxi seems very nervous." The gentle laughter of the young man in white gave people endless imagination. What kind of face did he have under the mask? "Do you know how many guards there are outside?" Heaven knows how many guards Long Fei-yi had left at the senior provincial official's estate, but this white-robed man had managed to fool all of them to sit in Long Fei-yi's seat and make tea. Han Yunxi was still worried and locked the door. "Could it be that His Highness Duke of Qin doesn't welcome me?" the white-robed man teased. Whenever Han Yunxi mentioned the Shadow Clan or Western Qin's imperial family to Long Fei-yi, he'd avoid her. It wasn't clear whether he wasn't interested or didn't want to talk about it. She didn't know what Long Fei-yi's attitude towards this gentleman from the Shadow Clan was. But she wasn't an idiot. How could there be such a coincidence in the world? How could the white-robed man show up as soon as Long Fei Yi was gone? This white-robed man obviously took a fancy to Long Fei Yi's absence and came here. You should know better than me whether I'm welcome or not, Han Yunxi smiled. Miss Yunxi is truly intelligent. The white-robed man poured tea for her like a master of the room, his movements elegant and casual. Han Yunxi wasn't in the mood for tea. She placed a hand on the table and asked, "Are you here for me or for the poison beast?" She'd asked him this question before, but he'd said he'd answer it the next time they met. Now it was time to give her an answer. He had to be a member of the Shadow Clan. If he was here for her, then her identity was confirmed. Han Yunxi was very anxious, but the white-robed man was leisurely and self-satisfied as he began to play Tai Chi good tea. As expected, His Highness Duke of Qin's tea is extraordinary. Those who don't believe can't be friends. You can leave. Han Yunxi was unhappy. She couldn't be friends with people who didn't keep their promises. This man had clearly promised her. She had been waiting for a few months, hoping for a few months, and when he finally agreed to come, it turned out to be like this. "Miss Yunxi, I'm here for the poison beast," the white-robed man finally said, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. "Then why did you risk your life to protect me?" Han Yunxi wouldn't believe him so easily. "If Jun Yixie had bullied any other girl that day, this one would have risked my life to save her too," the white-robed man explained. Han Yunxi shook her head. "You're lying. Miss Yunxi, could it be that in your heart, people always have a motive for helping each other?" the white-robed man asked. Han Yunxi gave a cold snort. "You're lying. If you're here for the poison beast, why didn't you take it away?" The white-robed man was Han Yunxi's savior, but she was still calm and objective before him. The white-robed man retorted, "The poison beast has already recognized its master. Do you think I can take it away?" Lil Thing really was clinging to her, so no one could take it away. A complicated look flashed past Han Yunxi's eyes before she asked, "You knew long ago that the poison beast would recognize its master?" The white-robed man laughed. "Miss Yunxi, if I knew long ago that the poison beast would recognize you as its master, why would I go through the extra trouble of following you into the sky pit?" After circling around the topic, Han Yunxi discovered that this white-robed man had calmly answered all her questions with a few words. Could it be that she and Long Fei Yi had been overthinking things? "You're from the Shadow Clan?" Han Yunxi asked next. But the white-robed man only stood up with a faint smile. "Next time then. If we meet again I'll answer you. This move again." Han Yunxi wasn't going to let him go so easily, but Su Donglin's voice came from outside. "Esteemed Wang Fei, open the door. Lunch has been delivered." Han Yunxi looked back, but the white-robed man had already vanished into thin air. Even the tea set on the tea table had been cleaned up, leaving no trace behind. "White-robed man, white-robed man. Although you answered my question, you didn't tell me why you were hiding from Long Fei Yi." Han Yunxi opened the door but wasn't in the mood to eat. Should she tell Long Fei Yi about today's events, or hide them from him for now? The white-robed man hadn't gone far. Or rather, he'd been there the entire time. He thought that if they never met again, they'd never lie to each other. Who knew that even after 20 years of cultivation, he couldn't beat the sight of her back? Seeing that Han Yunxi wasn't in the mood to eat, the white-robed man gave a silent sigh before turning to hide in the shadows outside the room. Meanwhile, in the abandoned courtyard in the southern suburbs, the wall cutter had finally calmed down. Only a small dent had been made in the earth wall, but it hadn't affected the overall situation. She dejectedly tossed aside 2 sharp stones and slowly turned around, her head bowed in despair. Chu Shifeng had been waiting by her side for 2 hours. When he saw her give up, he exhaled and hurried forward, gesturing for her to enter. "Mute Granny, His Highness has come personally. You've put on quite the airs." "That's right." The person Long Fei Yi had imprisoned was none other than Mute Granny, the very same woman Chu Shifeng had escorted back to Tianning's capital city. All that talk about being robbed on the way and Mute Granny falling off a cliff was a fabrication. Long Fei Yi's orders from the start were to take Mute Granny to the hidden pavilion and imprison her. Naturally, Mute Granny couldn't hear Chu Shifeng's words. She didn't even spare him a glance as she stormed into the room. Inside, Long Fei Yi had been waiting for ages. Why did he want to imprison Mute Granny? And he'd done it behind Han Yunxi's back. Chapter 391. Mute Granny stormed into the room, only to run into Long Fei Yi, who was brewing tea by himself. Long Fei Yi's powerful aura was enough to intimidate anyone, but Mute Granny wasn't afraid at all. She walked in openly. She'd been waiting for the right person to show up. She remembered clearly that Ling Er's friend had brought the young miss to the Mu estate to look for her. Later, the Mu clan head's guards had arrived and they'd started fighting. Afterwards, she'd fallen unconscious. By the time she woke up again, she'd been imprisoned by these people. Who were they? And how had they taken her out of the Mu estate? She'd been locked up in a secret room, where that ice-faced young man would occasionally visit her. Later on, a group of bandits had come to kidnap her, but they'd failed to do so. She'd been waiting this entire time to see what they wanted to do, but they'd never made a move. Since they weren't doing anything, she was going to make a scene and force the right person to show up. Mute Granny walked towards Long Fei Yi step by step. Long Fei Yi glanced at her before setting down a teacup and pouring tea. Mute Granny was both deaf and mute, so Long Fei Yi's words were useless. He was inviting Mute Granny to sit down. Mute Granny glanced at him. She understood, but she didn't sit. Instead, she stood in front of Long Fei Yi. She wanted Long Fei Yi to stand up. Long Fei Yi tapped the side of her teacup with his head still bowed. But Mute Granny suddenly took out a sharpened stone from her sleeve and pressed it against her neck. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but unfortunately she couldn't make a single sound. "Your Highness, she's trying to kill herself," Chu Shifeng cried out from behind. He'd felt sorry for little Li Si before, but now he wanted to kill him again. He'd made him stay close to Mute Granny, but he'd made Mute Granny grind out such a sharp stone and hide it on her body. Long Fei Yi remained unmoved. How could anyone hide their actions from him when they were standing right in front of him? He still didn't raise his head. Once again, he knocked on the table beside Mute Granny's teacup. Mute Granny didn't move, nor did Long Fei Yi. After a while, Chu Shifeng saw that Mute Granny's sharp stone had already drawn blood on her neck. He couldn't help but remind her, "Your Highness, you're bleeding." After spending so much effort to imprison this person, he still hadn't found the antidote for the broomcorn millet poison, and he still hadn't gotten the secret out of her. If something were to happen to her, wouldn't he vomit to death? However, Long Fei Yi did not move. Who knew that Mute Granny would suddenly raise the stone and stab it into her throat? In that split second, Long Fei Yi flung his teacup at Mute Granny, smashing the stone away. Mute Granny wanted to pick it up, but Chu Shifeng immediately kicked her aside. Mute Granny's face was full of fury as she glared at Long Fei Yi, her mouth agape. If she could speak, she'd be screaming at Long Fei Yi. Mute Granny wanted to throw herself at Long Fei Yi, but Chu Shifeng quickly pulled her back and tied her hands behind her back. Mute Granny stomped her feet and struggled, but in the end she was no match for Chu Shifeng's strength. Long Fei Yi finished his tea and finally spoke. "She's got a fiery temper. I heard that the Mu clan's Miss Mu Xen has a servant girl with a fiery temper by her side. That must be her." Mu Xen was none other than Mu Ling Er's fourth aunt, the young miss of the Mu clan who was rumored to have an affair with the poison sect. Actually, Long Fei Yi had started investigating Mu Xen as soon as he found out about Mute Granny's existence. No one knew whether Mu Xen's affair with the poison sect was true or just a rumor. If it was true, then no one knew what kind of relationship Mu Xen had with the poison sect, except for this servant girl. But no matter what, Mu Yingdong shouldn't have left Mute Granny alive. Mu Xen had already become a taboo in the Mu clan and medical city. Mu Yingdong's wisest move was to silence Mute Granny. Was he trying to lure out someone by keeping Mute Granny alive? Long Fei Yi didn't want to speculate any further. He only wanted to find the antidote as soon as possible and force Mute Granny to tell him the truth. Long Fei Yi took out a painting from his sleeve and slowly unfurled it on the table. Seeing this, the struggling Mute Granny suddenly fell silent. The painting depicted a young woman dressed as a doctor. She carried a cloth pouch on her back that was similar to Han Yunxi's medical pouch. The woman's features were delicate and pretty, but she couldn't be called a beauty. Still, her smile was bright and sweet, giving off an indescribable sense of kindness and beauty. Wasn't this the same painting of Mu Xen that hung in the Mu clan's bamboo house? Mute Granny fell silent for a while before she grew agitated. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to throw herself at the painting. She kept opening and closing her mouth to call out, "Young Mississippi, that's right." Mu Xen was the fourth young miss she'd watched grow up. Miss Mu Xen had treated her like a mother, but she was closer to Miss Mu Xen than her own daughter. Miss Mu Xen said that she would come back, but she never came back. Mute Granny had been guarding this painting all this time for over 20 years. In the midst of her emotions, Mute Granny immediately went on guard and glared at Long Fei Yi. How did this young man with extraordinary origins get his hands on this painting from the Mu clan? Was he looking for Miss Mu Xen? Or was he trying to get something out of her? Just what did he want? Chu Shifeng let go. For the third time, Long Fei Yi knocked on the table next to Mute Granny's teacup and indicated for her to sit down. Your Highness, be careful. Chu Shifeng couldn't help but remind him. Mute Granny's personality was hard to control. But Mute Granny didn't act rashly after he let go. Her gaze never left the painting as she sat down. Long Fei Yi was very generous. He rolled up the painting and pushed it towards Mute Granny. Mute Granny immediately took it, her wrinkled hands trembling as she carefully tidied up the painting. Once she was done, she tucked it away in her sleeves and even patted it a few times to make sure it was safe. Her expression as if she'd found a priceless treasure, and her coarse, wrinkled hands made one's heart ache. This is a servant waiting for her master. It's a pity that Mu Xian's already dead, Long Fei Yi remarked. Mu Xian was Tianxin, but Lady Tianxin was already dead. What would Mute Granny do if she found out? Han Yunxi and Gu had been in too much of a hurry to find her, so they didn't have time to talk properly. After putting away the painting, Mute Granny prepared to stand up, but Long Fei Yi took out another painting. This was none other than the one he'd drawn when he'd issued a bounty for Han Yunxi. Mute Granny recognized Han Yunxi. Based on the Xian character on Han Yunxi's medical pouch, she was certain that Han Yunxi was Mu Xian's daughter. Mute Granny reached out to grab the painting, but Long Fei Yi immediately took it back and carefully tucked it away in his robes. Mute Granny didn't move but gave Long Fei Yi a doubtful look. But Long Fei Yi didn't say anything else. He rose to leave the room and instructed Chu Shifeng, pick someone to keep watch. If there's any more trouble, you do it yourself. Mute Granny chased after him, but she couldn't catch up to Long Fei Yi. Seeing Long Fei Yi leave, Mute Granny finally gave up. She strolled back into the room and slowly sat down without sparing Chu Shifeng a glance. Her sunken eyes seemed to grow even more sunken as she clutched the painting in her sleeve. She desperately wished she could speak up and ask for clarification. She was smart enough to understand the young man's threat. He was using Mu Xian's daughter to threaten her. She didn't dare to make a fuss anymore. She knew that all she could do was wait and see what these people were up to. Chu Shifeng, on the other hand, was completely baffled. His master was here to draw a portrait? Just tell him to bring it to me. All right, Chu Shifeng wasn't thinking about Mute Granny right now, but the antidote for broomcorn millet poison. They already had the serpent fruit, but were missing two ingredients, Bear Chuan and Panoptic Red Lotus. His Highness had given Medicine Ghost Valley's Gu Qi Sha a year to search for these two ingredients, but there was still no news. Chu Shifeng only hoped that Gu Qi Sha would find the Bear Chuan and Panoptic Red Lotus as soon as possible. The sooner he did, the sooner his guards would be free. Most importantly, the sooner he wouldn't have to worry about esteemed Wang Fei finding out. Who knew whether Han Yunxi would find out about this? But this time she definitely wouldn't find out. It wasn't clear what Long Fei Yi was busy with this time, but by the time they returned to the senior provincial official's estate, it was already late at night. Han Yunxi was still awake, but she was already in her room. The husband and wife duo had seized the entire estate by ransacking properties, but were now living in guest rooms like an inn. Their rooms were only separated by a single wall. When she heard the door next door open, Han Yunxi immediately went out. His Highness is back? Long Fei Yi replied mildly. What were you busy with? Why didn't you bring me along? Han Yunxi asked teasingly. Instead of answering, Long Fei asked, still not sleeping? Han Yunxi was used to this by now. In any case, she was just asking casually without actually investigating his whereabouts. She'd been waiting for the right time to find Long Fei Yi and have a chat. Your Highness, that gentleman from the Shadow Clan came by, Han Yunxi murmured. She'd thought it over for an entire afternoon before deciding to tell Long Fei Yi the truth. After all, it had to do with her birth origins. Actually, Han Yunxi wasn't so keen on finding out her origins. After all, she was from the future and not the real young Miss Han. She had her own selfish motives for wanting to find out her origins. She even hoped that she was the orphan of the Western Qin Imperial clan. If that was the case, then she might be able to help Long Fei Yi even more. Compared to her origins, Han Yunxi was more interested in the truth behind Lady Tianxin's difficult labor. Was it an accident? Or did someone deliberately hurt her? Lady Tianxin was a doctor worthy of respect. She was also the great mother who'd given her this body. She had to find out the truth. If it wasn't an accident back then who was the culprit? What was their motive? That masked man in white? Long Fei Yi was very surprised. He came for a while in the afternoon, Han Yunxi replied honestly. What did he say? Long Feiyi was clearly anxious. He denied it. He said that he came for the little thing. He even said that the little thing had recognized him as its master, so he couldn't take it away. Han Yunshi was always so honest in front of Long Feiyi. Anything else? Long Feiyi asked again. Han Yunshi shrank back and asked pitifully, Your Highness, can we talk inside? To the readers, to watch Little Poison Consort's exclusive mini-theater, please add us on WeChat at Gmomo 2015. There are already 3 mini-theaters. Chapter 392. The winter night was cold and bone-chilling. When Han Yunshi shrank back, Long Feiyi realized that she was only wearing undergarments. She didn't even put on a cloak. He looked her up and down, then pulled her into the room and lectured her unhappily, Where are your manners? Han Yunshi had waited for an entire night. As soon as she heard the door open, she rushed over. She was anxious. She didn't explain. It was useless anyway. From the moment she took off her socks in front of him, she knew that this guy really minded this kind of thing. There was a heater in the room, which drove away the cold in an instant. However, Long Feiyi took off his coat and threw it to Han Yunshi. Put it on. Although it was a scolding, it was actually doting. Even if she saw Long Feiyi's cold face, Han Yunshi was still happy. She happily put it on and wrapped it tightly. Her clothes were filled with his unique scent. What else did that person say? Long Feiyi was very concerned about the white-clothed gentleman. I asked him if he was from the Shadow Clan. He said that he would tell me the next time we met. Han Yunshi answered truthfully. So, he will come again? Although Long Feiyi said this, he thought that it was true. The expert who had been hiding in the surroundings these past few days was probably that person from the Shadow Clan. Early on in the Sky Domain black market, when they stayed at the Lin family's grain store, he had sensed the existence of an expert around them. Later on, he didn't sense it on the way to the disaster area. However, after staying in the governor's manor, he often sensed it. He should be. Han Yunshi said, then asked in a low voice, Your Highness, that guy seems to be deliberately avoiding you? Long Feiyi had naturally noticed this long ago. However, he didn't expect Han Yunshi to ask him this. It was just like when they had discussed the Shadow Clan. She had also directly asked him if she was the orphan of Western Qin's imperial family. If there was a day when she learned all of his secrets, would she still be so unguarded and ask him such a naive question? Long Feiyi said indifferently, He saved you before, so I have to thank him. He doesn't need to hide. Why don't I ask him when he comes back next time? Han Yunshi was also at a loss. The white-clothed man was not as cheap as Gu. Not only did he tease her, but he also provoked Long Feiyi and schemed against him time and time again. It was normal for Gu to deliberately avoid Long Feiyi, but there was no need for the white-clothed man to do so. Han Yunshi silently mused that there must be more to this than meets the eye. Han Yunshi thought for a moment, then joked, Your Highness, could it be that you really have a grudge against the Shadow Clan? We don't know each other. What enmity could there be? Long Feiyi asked. Han Yunshi smiled, If your Highness is an orphan of the East Qin Imperial Clan, then you would have a deep grudge with the Shadow Clan. Thinking about it, this was the only possibility. The Shadow Clan was loyal to the Western Qin Imperial Clan. In the past, the Eastern and Western Qin Imperial clans were exterminated due to internal strife. The two clans had an irreconcilable grudge. The Shadow Clan's grudge against the East Qin Imperial Clan was as deep as the Western Qin Imperial Clan's grudge against the East Qin Imperial Clan. In that instant, a cold light flashed in Long Feiyi's eyes. It was cold and sharp like a knife. Unfortunately, Han Yunshi did not see it. Do you think that's possible? Long Feiyi asked. Han Yunshi laughed. She was just joking around, that was all. If that was the case, how could Long Feiyi allow someone with an unknown background to stay by his side? And how could the white-clothed man allow her to stay by Long Feiyi's side? Your Highness, is there any news about Mute Granny? This was what Han Yunshi wanted to ask when she entered the room. It had been more than 3 months. If they still couldn't find her, then the chances were very slim. Long Feiyi did not hesitate. He calmly said, I'm afraid that even her bones won't be found. This meant that Mute Granny was dead. Han Yunshi looked deeply at Long Feiyi. Her originally bright eyes dimmed. After a while, she muttered to herself, How should I explain this to Mu Ling'er? Mute Granny was not the only clue. If Mute Granny knew, then the Mu clan's patriarch Muing Dong would know as well. It was just that they did not want to reveal too much in front of Muing Dong. Compared to the mystery of her background, Han Yunxi was more worried about Mute Granny. She would never forget the tears that filled Mute Granny's eyes when she found out that she was Mu Xian's daughter. Those deep sunken eyes had long been dead. Because of her arrival, they were rekindled with trust and hope. Mu Ling hadn't been wrong in the first place. She was the one who'd brought Mute Granny out. If anything happened to Mute Granny, she had to take responsibility. Your Highness, then have you found those assassins? Han Yunxi asked next, her eyes flashing with hatred. If those people hiding in the shadows had the skills, they could come at her directly. Why would they bully a deaf and mute old woman who'd suffered half her life? No, Long Fei Yi was very taciturn. You haven't found a single clue in 3 months. How is Chu Shifeng doing his job? Han Yunxi was a little angry. After a long silence, Long Fei Yi ended the conversation. It's getting late. Go to sleep. Your Highness, are we just going to let the matter rest? Han Yunxi's face was full of disbelief. This wasn't Long Fei Yi's style at all. Your lordship will keep looking, but don't hold out too much hope. Mute Granny isn't the only clue, Long Fei Yi explained. Han Yunxi realized that she'd been too agitated. She wasn't in the mood, so she rose to leave. Long Fei Yi walked her to the door and said, Han Yunxi, your birth is a matter of the past. It's a matter of the previous generation. You should look forward. Your Highness, actually Han Yunxi wanted to explain, but Long Fei Yi pushed her into the room. It's getting late. Go to sleep. Then your Highness should rest early too, Han Yunxi intoned. Very soon the lights in the 2 rooms went out. Unfortunately, it was destined to be a sleepless night. Han Yunxi lay on the bed, tossing and turning restlessly in her bed. Her heart felt uneasy. Her sharp intuition told her that Long Fei Yi was intentionally avoiding certain matters. Was her intuition wrong, or was he really hiding something? She was curious about his secrets, but she'd never forced him to reveal them. But why was he hiding hers? Han Yunxi hoped that she'd guessed wrong and overthought things. Long Fei Yi wasn't in the room at all. He was sitting on the roof. Ever since he'd moved into the governor's estate, he'd often kept watch like this. Tonight, he hadn't sensed the presence of that expert, so he must have left. There was no need for him to keep watch. However, he continued to sit there. Under the cold moonlight, his figure appeared to be alone, 70% lonely and 30% desolate. The night was deep and the moon was still. In the alleys around the governor's estate, Aunt Rue, who hadn't been seen in a long time, appeared. Aunt Rue, that expert has left, the masked man whispered. Those who called Aunt Rue were not just Long Fei Yi and Tang Li, but also many members of the Tang sect. Aunt Rue had become a respectful title, regardless of identity or relationship. Because Tang Zijin's son had run away from the wedding, he'd offended the new bride's faction. Over the past 2 months, he'd been thoroughly vexed and busy as he searched for Tang Li while trying to salvage the marriage. For the time being, he didn't have time to deal with Han Yunxi. Tang Zijin had invited Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi to Tang Li's wedding as a ploy, but it hadn't succeeded. Tang Zijin had advised Aunt Rue not to act rashly for the time being, lest she angered Long Fei Yi. Unfortunately, Aunt Rue didn't listen. She couldn't tolerate a woman related to the Shadow Clan staying by Long Fei Yi's side. Others didn't know that Long Fei Yi was injured, but she knew very well. Although she didn't know that someone was locked up in the U Pavilion, she could still find out that Long Fei Yi was injured in the U Pavilion. She'd rushed over from the Tang sect as soon as Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi arrived in South Ning Prefecture. She'd been looking for an opportunity to make a move on Han Yunxi. With Long Fei Yi injured, it would be easy for her to kill Han Yunxi. Unfortunately, she hadn't expected that there would be a white-clothed expert secretly protecting Han Yunxi. Every time she made a move, that white-clothed expert would appear. She couldn't even get half a step closer to Han Yunxi. If she hadn't guessed wrong, that white-clothed expert was from the Shadow Clan. That kind of speed could only be achieved by someone from the Shadow Clan. He left. Aunt Rue muttered to herself. I'm sure he left. This subordinate was just at the back door of the prefectural governor's estate. He wasn't stopped, the black-clothed man reported. Aunt Rue sneered. He really knows how to calculate the timing. The white-clothed expert had left, but Long Fei Yi's injuries had already healed. How could Aunt Rue still have a chance to make a move? Did Long Fei Yi know of the white-clothed expert's existence? What about Han Yunxi? Was there any connection between her and this white-clothed expert? Aunt Rue, what's wrong with His Highness? If that person really was from the Shadow Clan, then doesn't that mean esteemed Wang Fei is? Before the black-clothed man could finish, Aunt Rue suddenly turned around and grabbed his neck. Who told you that person was from the Shadow Clan? Is Speed. The black-clothed man wanted to explain, but quickly realized that he knew too much. Aunt Rue, this subordinate wouldn't. Before he could finish speaking, he had already lost the ability to speak forever. Aunt Rue slowly wiped away the blood on her hands, her eyes dark. The more people who knew about the Shadow Clan, the worse it'd be for Faye. Her heart was filled with resentment, but she had no choice but to help hide the truth. Now that Long Fei Yi had recovered, Aunt Rue had no choice but to resentfully return to the Tang clan. There were so many disaster victims that transporting grain wasn't something that could be done in a few days. The prefectural governor's estate and various yamen offices didn't have enough manpower, so Long Fei Yi transferred some of the carriage drivers and guards to the villages below to help out. As for him and Han Yunxi, they still had one more important task, and that was to continue searching for grain. Last night's unpleasantness seemed to have passed with it. Today Han Yunxi was still in high spirits. Although this woman was often a little gloomy, she was still a positive and radiant girl. It wasn't clear how she'd convinced herself, but she was full of energy as soon as she woke up at noon. She earnestly discussed the matter of finding grain with Long Fei Yi and even made suggestions that surprised Long Fei Yi. Long Fei listened with keen interest as he nodded his head. It was as if nothing had happened last night. The two of them had just finished their discussion when Emperor Qinhui's imperial edict arrived. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were both very clear that Emperor Tianhui wouldn't let them off easily after sending them to the disaster areas. What kind of imperial edict was this? Chapter 393. Since Emperor Tianhui had sent an imperial edict at this time, rewards were necessary. The edict praised the Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei for their meritorious service in the disaster areas, as well as tracking down corrupt officials and eliminating evils for the people. But the most important part was yet to come. After that, Emperor Tianhui ordered the Duke of Qin to continue taking care of the disaster areas and ensure that the victims survived the winter. The edict clearly stated that the Duke of Qin could return to the capital only after farming had resumed in the 3 disaster areas. Since Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were sent to the disaster areas, how could Emperor Tianhui let them go so easily? Resume farming. That dog of an emperor. Han Yunxi couldn't help but curse. Resuming farming seemed very simple on the surface. As long as there was a spring thunder and a spring rain, the rivers would flow again, the soil would be nourished and the people would be full and energetic. Naturally, everyone would fight to be the first to farm without the need for the higher-ups to urge them. But the prerequisite for resuming farming was that everyone had to endure until the spring rains came. Moreover, it was up to Emperor Tianhui himself to determine the extent of the restoration of farming lands. It had to be said that Emperor Tianhui had left a lot of cards up his sleeve. Unlike Han Yunxi's indignation, Long Fei Yi remained calm and ice. He finished his tea before saying, "When the time comes, he'd better not come begging your lordship to go back." Hearing this, Han Yunxi's lips curved into an expectant smile. Although she wasn't sure if they could help the disaster victims survive the chill of spring, Long Fei Yi's words were enough to tell her that the best part was yet to come. She really wanted these 2 months to pass quickly. Watching His Highness Duke of Qin torture people was much more enjoyable than doing it herself. After receiving the edict, Han Yunxi went back to her rooms. She had been doing simulations in the detox system the entire time, trying to figure out how to treat the poison in Bailey Mingxiang's body. The next 2 to 3 days were critical, so she had to close her eyes and rest her mind in the detox system. Fortunately, Long Fei Yi didn't have anything to ask of her. Han Yunxi walked towards the backyard without looking back. She didn't know that Long Fei Yi had been watching her the entire time. His deep, dark eyes were extremely heavy. His Highness Duke of Qin, who usually didn't show his emotions on his face, actually wrote everything on his mind with his eyes. Chu Shifeng stared blankly. He couldn't see through it. Between the two of them, it was always His Highness who was calm and unruffled. But what exactly happened last night? His Highness was filled with thoughts while esteemed Wang Fei was fine. Chu Shifeng couldn't take it anymore. As soon as he saw Han Yunxi's figure disappear into the distance, he stepped forward and murmured, "Your Highness, is it because of mute Granny?" Long Fei Yi didn't even look at Chu Shifeng, much less reply. Chu Shifeng only felt resentful. How would he dare to ask again? Not long after, a secret guard came over. "Your Highness, there's news from the Medicine Ghost Valley. Gu Qisha hasn't returned since the last time he left the valley. He said that he's been looking for those 2 herbs." Your lordship wants information on those 2 herbs. Long Fei Yi was very unhappy. For now, there's no news, the guard replied timidly. Send someone to Medicine City's Wang clan and bring this back. Have Wang Gong think of a way. Tell him to hurry. As Long Fei Yi spoke, he handed over the entry token Mu Yingdong had given him last time. This allowed him to enter the Mu clan's medicinal grounds and take away any ingredient he wanted. The guard took the item and prepared to leave immediately. Chu Shifeng didn't want to coax him, but after some hesitation he decided to throw caution to the wind and stop the guard from leaving. Your Highness, you have to think thrice before going to the Mu clan. His Highness had given Gu Qisha a year's time, but that wasn't a long time at all. After all, the 2 herbs weren't easy to find. But now His Highness was panicking. Him looking for the Wang family and using the Mu family's medicinal herb storehouse pass was actually an unnecessary action. More importantly, it was very likely that Mu Yingdong was the one who poisoned Mute Granny. Naturally, the man would know the antidote for the poison. If they really did find the ingredients at the Mu clan, Mu Yingdong would definitely suspect that Mute Granny was still alive. Once news of this spread, esteemed Wang Fei would have no way of explaining herself. Long Fei Yi immediately calmed down at Chu Shifeng's reminder. He realized that he'd been too impatient. He'd sought out Gu Qisha in the first place precisely because the man was an expert at finding herbs. If Medicine City had these 2 things, Gu Qisha would definitely be able to find them. Who would suspect Gu Qisha if he showed up to look for the ingredients? Long Fei Yi furrowed his brows and sat down. Chu Shifeng quickly poured him tea. Your Highness, you've lost track of your emotions. Lost track of my emotions? He really had lost track of his emotions multiple times over Mute Granny's matter. Even the stab to his heart had been caused by his impatience. Han Yunxi had been disappointed last night, but she'd recovered today. Still, he'd rather her stay disappointed. For the first time he realized that he couldn't figure her out. For the first time he felt like he was losing control. This entire time she'd been the one to pester him. Unknowingly he'd been swayed by her emotions as well. Long Fei Yi fell silent for a long time before he finally told Chu Shifeng, go find Gu Qisha personally. Tell him that if he can find the 2 ingredients within half a year, your lordship will owe him a favor. Favors had to be repaid. In the future, His Highness Duke of Qin wouldn't be able to refuse Gu Qisha's requests. Chu Shifeng wanted to persuade him further, but when he saw His Highness Duke of Qin's resolute gaze, he could only comply. Long Fei Yi was in a rush to find the 2 ingredients. Far away in Medicine City, Mu Ling was anxious as well. She'd taken matters into her own hands at the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet to represent Medicine City's procession. As a result, she'd become the target of condemnation by all the major powers in the city. Even Mu Yingdong, who doted on her the most, couldn't protect her and told her to leave the city to lie low for a while. Unfortunately, she'd just left Medicine City when Gu's words brought her back. Of course, she didn't dare to let her father know she'd gone back. After returning to the Mu estate to get her notes on medicinal ingredients, she'd snuck into the Mu clan's medicine storehouse and stayed there until now. She'd found the whereabouts of the panoptic red lotus in her notes when she was very young. The Mu clan's medicine storehouse had a single panoptic red lotus in it. Unfortunately, she hadn't found a single trace of it after searching for 3 months. Other families' medicine storehouses might be nothing more than storehouses, such as the Han clans. But the 3 great clans in Medicine City had storehouses as big as several mountains. The Mu clan's medicinal herb storehouse was the largest in the entire Medicine City. It occupied 3 large mountains and countless valleys of varying sizes inside. Mu Ling had to search for medicine while being on guard against the patrolling guards and medicine boys. It was truly tiring. She'd start looking for medicine at daybreak and find a tree to lean against when it got dark. For the past 3 months, she'd only eaten dry rations and couldn't even drink a mouthful of hot soup in the middle of winter. She was afraid that she'd be discovered if she started a fire. She was already thin to begin with, but now she'd lost a lot of weight and looked haggard. Today, as usual, she set out at daybreak. Who knew that the sky would suddenly be filled with dark clouds in the afternoon? Fuck. She let out a sigh of relief and pouted her little mouth very high. Just as he finished scolding, bean-sized raindrops began to fall. The rain in winter was freezing rain. Mu Ling looked around. The only shelter she could find was the withered tree she'd slept under last night. There were caves and forests nearby, but those places were guarded by medicine boys and guards. It would be easy to be discovered. The bean-sized raindrops fell faster and faster. Soon it became a curtain of rain. Walala, it became bigger and bigger. Mu Ling hurriedly ran under the withered tree and hid under the long tree trunk to avoid the rain. At this time she was already soaked. Although it was very cold, she didn't mind. After all, she'd never been a flower in a greenhouse. She carelessly sat cross-legged on the wet ground and propped her chin up with her hands. She had an impatient expression as she waited. No matter how thick the tree trunk was, how much rain could it block? Soon Mu Ling didn't dare to sit anymore. She squatted down and curled up into a ball, shivering. It was so cold. From afar, Mu Ling looked like a lost animal in the rain. Anyone who saw her would feel sorry for her. However, this girl was already in such dire straits, but she didn't have a trace of complaint or regret. She lowered her head, allowing the two streams of rain to flow down from her head and down her cheeks. As she shivered, she tried hard to remember where she'd seen the panoptic red lotus when she was young. She wouldn't remember wrongly. The panoptic red lotus was in these 3 mountains. Moreover, she was certain that only her father could pluck such an expensive medicinal herb. Her father didn't need to use this medicinal herb these few years. She wiped her face and seriously muttered to herself, "It must be here." Just as she finished speaking, the rain suddenly stopped. That's not right. The rain in front of her was still falling down. Why was there no rain above her head? Mu Ling suspiciously raised her head to look. She only saw a patch of enchanting red. In the cold winter rain, it was burning with a patch of enchanting red lotus flames. In this patch of enchanting red fire, that man's charming eyes were like silk and his dimples were like flowers. At this moment, Mu Ling-er's entire world was clear after the rain and flowers bloomed like brocade. Chi brother? She stood up in pleasant surprise and threw herself at Gu Qishao. Gu was squatting on the horizontal branch of a tree. He stroked his eyebrows with one hand and held a large red umbrella with the other. He allowed Mu Ling-er to throw herself at him. The smile on his face didn't change at all. However, this girl who was stronger than weeds suddenly burst into tears the moment she threw herself into his warm embrace. Boo-hoo. Chi brother, boo-hoo, what's wrong? Gu asked gently. Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Mu Ling-er was still crying. She was no longer as strong as before. She cried miserably and couldn't even speak. She looked like a pitiful little girl. Gu looked at the sky helplessly. Cry baby, go ahead and cry. Cry all you want. When he wasn't around, she was as strong as weeds. When he was here, she cried like this. Was she pretending? She wasn't. No matter how strong a girl was, once she had an arm to rely on, all her strength would instantly collapse. Mu Ling-er cried for a long time. Other than the sound of boo-hoo, she only said the 3 words Chi brother. She didn't complain at all. After a long time she finally stopped. She sniffed and looked up at Gu. Chi brother. You're not crying anymore? Gu raised his eyebrows and asked. I'm done crying. Mu Ling-er smiled through her tears. Chapter 394. Mu Ling-er was a carefree and straightforward girl, but in front of Gu she became a crybaby. However, she was not the kind of troublesome woman who would cry endlessly. When she cried freely, she could immediately laugh. She hurriedly grabbed Gu's arm for fear that he would run away. Chi brother, I knew you would come to me. Gu disliked her wet body and wanted to push her away, but Mu Ling-er held him very tightly. Gu glared at her. Mu Ling-er raised her eyebrows and looked at him provocatively, as if she would never let go. Hee, if I didn't find those 2 things, of course I would come to you. Gu sneered. As soon as these words came out, Mu Ling-er resentfully let go. Chi brother came to find the medicine, not to find her. She was very clear about this. She seemed to be careless, but in her heart she saw things more clearly than anyone else. From the time they met, Chi brother almost never came to her unless he needed something. If I don't find the medicine, will you never forgive me? Mu Ling-er asked seriously. Chi brother said that as long as she found the 2 medicine, he would forgive her for the Tianqing incident. Gu could stand this girl's pestering and her snot and tears, but he couldn't stand her serious look. Let's go and take shelter from the rain first. I have something to discuss with you. In fact, Gu had been here for a long time. He had been searching in the Mu family's medicinal herb storehouse for more than a month, but unfortunately he found nothing. There was really no place to take shelter from the rain. The 2 found a safe cave and the rain stopped. Mu Ling-er's clothes, hair and shoes were all wet. As soon as she entered the cave, she soaked the ground. But she didn't care about anything and asked anxiously, Chi brother, What do you want to discuss with me? Gu was not anxious with her. He slowly wiped off the water droplets on his body and found a clean stone to sit on. He poked his hand and said, "It's cold? Tsk, this bad thing." He only cared about himself. Didn't he see that Mu Linger, a little girl, was drenched? If it were Han Yunxi today, this guy would have eagerly started a fire. He might even find a clean set of clothes for her in the rain. He was not someone who did not know how to take care of others, but he just had to bully Mu Linger. That was how matters of the heart were. Both parties were willing and there was nothing to complain about. Mu Linger was so cold that she was shivering. Her lips were completely pale. When she heard that Gu was cold, she hurriedly gathered all the dead leaves in the cave and asked Gu for a match to start a fire. Without needing her to call him, Gu had already approached the fire and warmed himself up with a look of enjoyment. "Chi brother, what do you want to say?" Mu Linger was very curious. "Can you strive to find those 2 medicinal herbs within half a year?" Gu was still talking about the medicinal herbs. Half a year? Mu Linger was suspicious. What are these things for? Is someone poisoned? Will the poison take effect in half a year? Why do you care so much? Just tell me whether or not I can. Gu Qixiao grew unhappy. If I'm happy then I can. If I'm not happy, then I can't. Mu Linger also had a temper. Gu squinted his eyes and smiled with interest. "Oh little girl, you know how to throw a tantrum with me?" Mu Linger looked at him arrogantly and did not say a word. Gu suddenly approached and lifted Mu Linger's chin. He whispered mischievously, "What do I have to do to make you happy?" An evil aura rushed towards her. His beautiful face was right in front of her eyes. Mu Linger's heart was beating wildly. Even though she knew that Chi brother was just joking, she still could not help but indulge in it. Her heart was infatuated and so was her person. As long as Chi brother is happy, Linger will be happy. Her voice was as gentle as spring water. She was as beautiful as spring. Unfortunately, Gu could not see it. He immediately let go and said excitedly, "Linger, are you really confident?" Good things were always short-lived. Ignoring the disappointment in her heart, Mu Linger was still arrogant. She raised her chin and said, "The panoptic red lotus is in these 3 mountains. As for the Bear River, it's actually in." Before Mu Linger could finish speaking, she heard the sound of wind breaking from outside the cave. The 2 of them turned their heads to avoid it. Soon a familiar voice was heard. "Mu Linger, come out. I know you're inside." Wasn't this voice the Mu family's eldest young master, Mu Chaoran? How did he find this place? One had to know that Mu Chaoran was not only Mu Yingdong's eldest son, but also the eldest son of the first wife. His status was very noble, and it could be said that he was the most legitimate successor of the Mu family. Unfortunately, his pharmaceutical skills were far inferior to Mu Linger's, the daughter of a concubine. In the end, a medicinal family was not a royal family. In such a family, ability was the most important and birth was secondary. Mu Linger was Mu Yingdong's designated successor. Mu Chaoran had long disliked Mu Linger. In the past he couldn't cause trouble for Mu Linger because of Mu Yingdong. Now that Mu Linger was involved in such a big matter, how could Mu Chaoran let go of such a good opportunity? Ever since the entire Medicine City was attacking Mu Linger because of the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, Mu Chaoran hadn't been idle. He had been looking for Mu Linger the entire time. It was a coincidence that they ran into each other today. Mu Linger was sick and tired of her brothers and sisters, especially this eldest brother of hers. In the past, she would have treated any provocation as a dog barking. But now that she had a case, it would be troublesome if Mu Chaoran exposed her whereabouts. Mu Linger hesitated for a moment, then said, "Chi brother, go away first. I'll discuss this with him." As she spoke, the person outside impatiently shouted, "Mu Linger, if you don't come out, I'll go tell mother right away." If he told father, he would probably cover up for this brat again. But if he told mother, mother would definitely make a big deal out of it. Even father wouldn't be able to handle it. Gu didn't say a word and hid behind a large rock. Mu Chaoran was still talking nonsense here, which meant that he wouldn't really tell the Mu clan's matriarch. He must have something to ask of Mu Linger. Seeing that Gu had hidden himself, Mu Linger walked out confidently. She stopped at the cave entrance and saw Mu Chaoran standing alone outside. "If you have something to say, then say it," Mu Linger said cold. "A wild child without a mother, this is the kind of upbringing you have?" Mu Chaoran spat. Mu Linger narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" "I want your 30 medicinal notes, not a single one less. Otherwise," Mu Chaoran was very direct. Mu Linger sucked in a breath of cold air. You're robbing me? The medicinal notes were Mu Linger's treasure. It was the essence of what she had learned since she was young. There were also many of her secret recipes recorded inside. This thing was priceless, let alone 30 of them. You're just going to treat it as being robbed? Mu Chaoran shrugged, looking like he had no other choice. What if I don't give it to you? Mu Linger asked cold. It's fine if you don't give it to me. Either I go tell mother now or… Mu Chaoran thought for a moment and smiled. Alright, you're still my little sister. I'll give you a chance. Kneel down and admit that your medicinal skills are inferior to mine, and I'll treat it as if I didn't meet you today and didn't see you bringing outsiders into the medicinal herb storage. He was going too far and was taking advantage of the situation. Mu Chaoran was actually here to bully people today. If he told mother about this matter and let mother make a big fuss, father would still be unhappy in the end. Mother and son wouldn't get any benefits. Even if he couldn't do anything to Mu Linger, he could at least humiliate her once and kill her spirit. Mu Linger's hands clenched tightly as her heart violently heaved up and down. She had always been giving in and hiding, but this group of people still couldn't tolerate her. It was said that the heavens were jealous of geniuses, but it should be people who were jealous of geniuses. What if I don't? Mu Linger asked cold again. Who knew that the moment her voice fell, Mu Chaoran shouted, Someone come, you shut up. Mu Linger was anxious. The entire Mu family, except for father, wanted to hand her over to the Medical Herbs Association. At this juncture she couldn't afford to gamble or make a fuss. She had to find the medicine. What, have you thought it through? Mu Chaoran smiled very cockily. Mu Linger clenched her teeth tightly. She didn't want to agree, but this young master's patience is limited. Mu Chaoran urged. Mu Linger stared at him and almost knelt down. At this time, a red figure suddenly flew out from the cave. Gu's speed was very fast. Before Mu Chaoran could see his appearance, he had already landed behind Mu Chaoran. His well-maintained white and gentle hand suddenly grabbed Mu Chaoran's neck. Don't kill him. Mu Linger was anxious. There were many cases of brothers killing each other in the Mu family, but she didn't want her hands to be stained with this kind of blood. Otherwise, she would have already asked Chi brother to silence Mu Chaoran and save herself a lot of trouble. Gu's lips curled into a sneer. He ignored Mu Linger's obstruction and slowly pierced his fingernails into Mu Chaoran's neck. No, I didn't see anything. Mu Chaoran was frightened. But soon he couldn't make a sound. Blood flowed out and his throat hurt like needles. When he spoke, the pain was unbearable. I'm the only one who can bully this girl. Remember this. Gu's voice was so low that it sounded like it came from hell. He had always bullied Mu Linger, but he was so overbearing that he didn't allow others to bully her. Bullying was also a kind of special privilege. Mu Chaoran was so scared that his whole body trembled. He looked at Mu Linger for help. Mu Linger didn't hear Gu's words just now. She was also frightened. Chi brother, he's my brother after all. Gu threw him to the side and coldly said, If you dare to say anything about today's matter, I'll give it a try. Mu Chaoran was also a martial artist, so he was very clear about the weight of this threat. I didn't see anything. He almost rolled and crawled to escape. Mu Linger finally let out a sigh of relief. Chi brother is still the smart one. With a little threat, he won't dare to do anything for at least half a year. As long as she could help Chi brother find those 2 ingredients, she didn't care about the sanctions of the Medical Materials Association. In any case, if she wanted to continue living in Medicine City, she wouldn't be able to escape in this lifetime. Gu slowly wiped his hands clean and asked, Who did you say had the bear Chuan? Chapter 395. There were only 3 ingredients needed to cure Mute Granny's poison: serpent fruit, bear Chuan, and panoptic red lotus. Now that the serpent fruit was in Chang Fei Ye's hands and the panoptic red lotus was confirmed to be in the Mu family's herb storage, only the bear Chuan was still missing. Mu Linger's eyes flashed with a sly glint as she smirked. Chi brother, do you think I'll become more powerful than Gu Chi Sha from Medicine Ghost Valley in the future? You will. Gu was very certain. There's only one bear Chuan in the world. Gu Chi Sha probably doesn't know where it is either, Mu Linger said mysteriously. Still not telling me? Clearly Gu's patience was running out. Mu Linger leaned over and whispered in his ear, Northern Li's Kong Wang. Junixia. Gu was very surprised. How did you know? Junixia had kept a low profile ever since he was defeated in Medical City, But Gu hadn't forgotten about him. He had always been a vengeful person. He would take revenge for both himself and Poison Lass. Even if Junie Xie was poisoned by Poison Lass and could never be cured, it was Poison Lass who took revenge for him. Gu Qishao had been waiting this entire time to take revenge for Poison Lass. This thing is being raised in the 100 poison sex herb storage. I spent a lot of money to buy this information from a friend. Unlike Gu Qishao, who was an enemy in the medical circle, Mu Ling-er had many friends and was naturally well informed. Qi brother, when we find the panoptic red lotus, let's go to the 100 poison sex herb storage together, okay? Mu Ling-er was very excited. She didn't tell Qi Gij about this in the letter because she wanted to find him personally and beg him to agree. The happiest thing was to go on an adventure with Qi brother, to live and die together, to share sorrow and joy. Junie Xie, Gu rubbed his chin and pondered for a while. There's no hurry. Let's find the panoptic red lotus first. As long as he was sure that Xiong Chuan was with Junie Xie, he was relieved. Qi brother, Mu Ling-er was about to say something when she suddenly sneezed. His entire body was dripping wet, and when the wind blew, it was really cold to the bone. Good girl, dry your clothes first. I'll keep watch for you. Gu had a smile on his face the whole time. He was in a very good mood. A casual word of good girl made Mu Ling-er instantly become obedient. She said happily, okay? When Mu Ling-er finished tidying up and came out, Gu was leaning against the wall with one hand behind his head and the other hand stroking his smooth chin. His long and narrow eyes were slightly narrowed, as if he was planning something. Qi brother, what are you thinking about? Mu Ling-er's intuition told her that there was something wrong with this guy. Nothing. Gu lazily rose to his feet. Let's figure things out and split up. Mu Ling-er was delighted. She could spend time with Qi brother for a long time now. In any case, she'd have plenty of time to ask him questions in the future. Aside from the places they'd already searched, there was still more than half of the Mu clan's medicine storehouse that they hadn't searched yet. The two of them discussed their routes and split up before meeting up at night. Their search ended up taking them over 2 months. 2 months later, it was already the end of the year. There wasn't much grain left in Tianning's disaster regions. Plenty of grain had been donated over the past 2 months, but it was still like trying to put out a burning cart with a cup of water. Thanks to Emperor Qianhui's incitement, all of Tianning from top to bottom began to pay attention to the disaster areas after the new year. However, His Highness Duke of Qin, who was in charge of the disaster relief efforts, was no longer in the region. Your Majesty, the spies in South Ning Prefecture sent news that His Highness Duke of Qin has left the prefecture. Eunuch Luo reported. Where to? Emperor Tianhui was surprised. He was the one who'd personally sent the Duke of Qin to the disaster regions, but he was the one who worried the most. Eunuch Luo replied timidly, the spies are still searching. At his words, Emperor Tianhui lost his temper and slapped the table. Useless trash. A bunch of useless trash. So many people were watching one person, but they still lost sight of him. For Emperor Tianhui, this was his last gamble. He had to be extra cautious. Your Majesty, His Highness Duke of Qin couldn't have secretly gone to look for grain, right? Eunuch Luo asked doubtfully. He hadn't looked for grain in the past 2 months. Emperor Tianhui had been paying attention to the Duke of Qin and Qin Wangfei's every move in South Ning Prefecture. Actually, it wasn't just Emperor Tianhui but everyone else as well. They all assumed that His Highness Duke of Qin and esteemed Wangfei would be in a hurry to find grain. But His Highness Duke of Qin hadn't found a single grain in the past 2 months. He and esteemed Wangfei were living in seclusion at the South Ning Prefecture officials' estate as if they were on vacation. If they didn't look for grain 2 months ago, where would they go now? Emperor Tianhui retorted unhappily. This year's harvest hadn't been good. It was the end of the year when grain was needed, so there was a shortage of grain everywhere. Then, where would they go? Eunuch Luo asked thoughtfully. Emperor Tianhui glared at him, too angry to speak. Eunuch Luo actually dared to ask him? Who was he supposed to ask if Eunuch Luo was asking him? As soon as Eunuch Luo met Emperor Tianhui's eyes, he backed away in fear and shut his mouth. Emperor Tianhui furiously slapped the table. Search. Find them even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. Otherwise, don't even think about celebrating the new year. Scared to death, Eunuch Luo hastily went to announce the decree. Just where were Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi? Emperor Tianhui was paying close attention, but Long Fei Yi wasn't hiding from him, but the Tang clan. There were only 10 days left until New Year's Eve. Long Feiyi received news ahead of time from the Tang clan that Tang Zijin had already taken care of Tang Li's escape from his marriage. He was going to personally visit the South Ning Prefecture official's estate to invite him and Han Yunxi to the Tang clan for New Year's. South Ning Prefecture wasn't far from the Tang clan. Long Feiyi left with Han Yunxi the very next night after receiving the news. It was easy for him to find an excuse for not going, but he was too lazy to find one. "Your Highness, just where are we going?" Han Yunxi was still in a daze. She had no idea what was going on. "New Year's Eve," Long Feiyi said simply. "Back to the capital? We won't make it in time either?" Han Yunxi was alarmed. According to the rules of Tianning's imperial clan, even the princes, dukes and Jun Wang who had been sent out had to return to the capital, to say nothing of Long Feiyi, the noblest of all dukes. But Emperor Tianhui couldn't send them to the disaster areas so easily. How could he let them go back so easily? There were only 10 days left until New Year's Eve, so they wouldn't be able to make it back in time. Long Feiyi was about to say something when he stopped himself. "Sleep then. You'll know when we get there." Over the past 2 months, he'd been searching for the whereabouts of the 7 noble families' descendants while Han Yunxi was immersed in the detox dimension, trying to figure out the antidote for Bailey Mingxiang's poisons. The two of them didn't put the matter of finding grain to heart. To outsiders, it looked like they were on vacation, but they knew better than anyone else how busy they were. Han Yunxi wasn't in the best of spirits because she was immersed in the detox dimension. Moreover, the days were getting colder and colder, making her more and more sleepy. "Is your Highness planning to give Qinxia a surprise?" Han Yunxi asked with interest. "A surprise for her? Did that count?" Long Feiyi had never understood how to curry favor with a woman, much less give her a surprise. Perhaps this was it. "You'll know when we get there," he said the same thing. "Then Qinxia will look forward to it." Han Yunxi stole a glance at him just as Long Feiyi's gaze drifted over as well. When he saw her looking at him, he immediately averted his gaze. Han Yunxi was still wrapped in a white fox fur coat as she curled up on one side, her eyes closed. She should have gone back into the detox dimension, but Long Feiyi's tantalizing words made it impossible for her to concentrate. In this world, only the man by her side could do such a thing. A few words were enough to stir up the waters of her heart, making it impossible for her to calm down. New Year's Eve was a major event. Family matters were meant to be celebrated with family. It was impossible for her to return to the capital. Was this fellow going to take her to see his family? To the Tang clan? He had said that his parents were from the Tang clan. Although Han Yunxi didn't like seeing Aunt Ru's despicable face, she would still be very happy if she could go back to the Tang clan with Long Feiyi for New Year's Eve. After all, it was as grand as going back with him to see his parents. This meant that he had completely brought her into his world. Although he didn't say anything, she didn't ask. However, in the end she still hoped that he would tell her more of his secrets. He said that one's background was a matter of the past, a matter of the previous generation, and that one should look forward to the future. But if one didn't understand a person's past, how could one understand him, love him, dote on him, protect him? Bailey Mingxiang had started cultivating beauty's blood at such a young age. What about him? At what age did he have the ambition to conquer the world? Was it tiring? Long Feiyi, my past belonged to Han Yunxi whose soul had died. I don't care about it. But your past is something that you personally experience day by day. How can I not care? Han Yunxi secretly opened her eyes. She saw Long Feiyi holding a scroll and carefully reading it. He was dressed in a snow-white robe with a luxurious fox fur robe draped over it. The white was spotless and elegant, while the purple was noble and extraordinary. He didn't look like an ordinary person. Such a quiet and restrained scene would forever be engraved in Han Yunxi's heart. Long Feiyi, I look forward to getting closer to you. Even closer. I will definitely finish walking 100 steps. The carriage took a hidden path and didn't travel fast. When they arrived at their destination, there were only 2 days left until New Year's Eve. She didn't know how he developed this habit, but when they were in the same carriage he would always get off first and then personally help her down. This time she closed her eyes and felt the door sill to get out. She almost fell. Seeing this, he hurriedly supported her. What are you doing? Is it a surprise? Han Yunxi asked with a smile. She had always remembered it, but he had forgotten. Han Yunxi waited. She wanted to see how he would answer this time. Unfortunately, she waited and waited, but Long Feiyi didn't say anything for a long time. Han Yunxi's good mood was inevitably dampened after waiting for a long time. Alright, she had done something unnecessary. This guy was as cold as an iceberg. He didn't even know how to joke. How could he be in the mood for this? If he didn't answer, she might as well answer it herself. Hee hee, you'll know when you open your eyes. Han Yunshi was about to open her eyes when Long Fei Yi suddenly reached out and covered her eyes. Wait. Chapter 396. Long Fei Yi was even colder than the dead of winter, but his palms were warm and scorching. The familiar warmth enveloped her eyes, so warm that Han Yunshi had the urge to never open her eyes again. Rather than seeing this man's existence, she might as well feel his existence. Although she knew this wouldn't last forever, she still hoped that this moment could last a little longer. Han Yunshi closed her eyes, enjoying the rare warmth as she waited. Who knew that Long Fei Yi would suddenly carry her in his arms and take large strides towards the entrance? Don't open your eyes yet? There really was a surprise? She had clearly been looking forward to it the entire time, but sometimes she was still very surprised. She was nervous and obediently allowed him to carry her the entire way, her eyes tightly shut. After walking for a long time, apart from his hurried footsteps, she didn't hear any other sounds. Her hanging heart thumped loudly. After walking for a long time, Long Fei Yi finally put Han Yunshi down. Your Highness, can I open my eyes now? Han Yunshi timidly asked. Long Fei murmured but didn't say anything else. Han Yunshi immediately opened her eyes, instantly stunned by the scene in front of her. So beautiful. She discovered that she was in the depths of the plum garden. What a beautiful world wrapped in silver. The plum blossoms reflected the snow, just like a fairyland. Han Yunshi looked around and discovered that this plum garden was so big that she couldn't see the end. Rather than calling this a plum garden, it was better to call this a sea of plum blossoms. No matter which direction she walked, she couldn't see the end. In this world there was only snow, only plum blossoms, only him, only her. It was like a pure paradise. Just as Han Yunshi was sighing in amazement, Long Fei Yi, who was standing behind her, began to softly recite a poem. Wind and rain send spring back, flying snow welcomes spring. Already 100 zhang of ice on the precipice, there are still blossoms. Blossoms don't compete for spring, they only report spring as it comes. When the mountain flowers bloom, she smiles among them. Wasn't this poem the one she'd been forced to write last year when the plum blossoms were in full bloom and she'd been invited by Princess Changping to participate in the plum blossom meet? Actually, it couldn't be said that she had written it, because she had stolen Lao Mao's poem. It was precisely this poem that gave Princess Changping and the others a resounding slap to the face. It was also precisely because of this poem that the talented Duanmu Yao was unable to compose any more poems. She had won that battle beautifully. She had always thought that he would never care about her when she was fighting alone in all those troubles. Who knew that he had actually memorized this poem? Han Yunshi looked back and felt an indescribable sense of pleasant surprise. The plum blossoms in the garden were not a pleasant surprise, but his soft moan was the real surprise. Your Highness, so you know this poem? Han Yunshi was wearing a spotless white dress and a snow-white fox fur coat. She stood in this world of red plum blossoms reflecting the snow with a resplendent smile. Her smile was reflected in the poem, She Smiles in the Thicket. This wasn't a deliberate surprise Long Fei Yi wanted to give her. It was just that this scene reminded him of that poem. He had indeed secretly paid attention to Princess Changping's plum blossom meet last year. I've heard of it, he replied indifferently. You memorized it? Han Yunshi asked. Long Fei Yi glanced at her but didn't reply. He moved deeper into the plum blossom sea to admire the plum blossoms. Han Yunshi stood in place, watching his back without moving. Long Fei Yi had already walked far away when he saw that Han Yunshi still hadn't followed him. Only then did he stop. The poem wasn't bad. I memorized it while I was at it. That was exactly what she wanted him to say. Han Yunshi was satisfied and eagerly followed him. Your Highness, what is this place? It's rare to see such a large garden. Jiangnan's plum blossom sea. This garden is for you as a New Year's gift. We'll spend the New Year here this year. Long Fei Yi casually replied while admiring the plum blossoms, as if he was talking about something unimportant. However, Han Yunshi was stunned. Jiangnan's plum blossom sea. This was the most famous of the 3 great gardens in Jiangnan. It was named after the plum blossoms that bloomed like the sea every year during winter and spring. This garden was 3 times the size of the Duke of Qin's residences. It would take at least 3 days and 3 nights to walk through the entire courtyard. Its owner had always been mysterious. She didn't expect it to be Long Fei Yi. Did he just say that he was going to give this garden to her? The first gift he gave her was a bracelet that was worth an entire country. The second gift he gave her was a garden whose value couldn't be appraised. Although they were legally married, did this guy have to be so extravagant? After Han Yunshi's pleasant surprise, she was a little shocked. Just how rich was this guy's family? Long Fei Yi had already walked far away, but Han Yunshi was still standing in place. He turned back and beckoned with his finger. Come here. Your Highness, it's too valuable. Han Yunshi replied truthfully. You don't like it? Long Fei Yi asked. Han Yunshi immediately shook her head. How could she not like the two surprises of a poem and a garden? It's good that you like it. They're all common things, so there's nothing valuable about them. Long Fei Yi said as he took out the plum blossom token from his sleeve and stuffed it into Han Yunshi's hand. The owner of this token was the master of the plum sea. All the servants and guards in the garden had to listen to their orders. Since the token was already stuffed into her hand, Han Yunshi knew that with his temper, she had no room to refuse. Then what does your Highness think is valuable? She asked curiously. Long Fei Yi turned back to look at her. What do you think? Han Yunshi looked seriously at Long Fei Yi and replied without hesitation. If you want to win the heart of one person, they'll be together until their hair turns white. Long Fei Yi, you also know that those are all common things. No matter how valuable something is, even if it's the world as a betrothal gift, it can't compare to you taking a step towards me. Long Fei Yi, in your eyes, how many steps are there between us? Seeing Han Yunshi's sincere and stubborn gaze, Long Fei Yi didn't say anything. After a long time, he finally slowly pulled Han Yunshi into his embrace. Snowflakes began to flutter and silently fell on their hair and shoulders. In the plum sea, the two people were silent for the entire world. If you want to win the heart of one person, they'll be together until their hair turns white. Long Fei Yi, if you have to make a choice one day, what is the most important thing in your heart? In the center of the plum forest, there was a short, symmetrical Japanese-style house. In the middle was a tea room, on the left and right were side rooms, and in the back was a natural hot bath. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi stayed here until night fell. Han Yunshi discovered the true meaning of Long Fei Yi's words, "Let's celebrate the new year here." It really was just the two of them celebrating the new year together. Not a single person from the Tang sect was seen. This seemed even better. On New Year's Eve, good wine and delicacies were prepared. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi sat across from each other and drank. There were 2 or 3 servants standing guard at the side. Snowflakes swirled outside the door and steam rose from the hot bath behind them. Everything was as silent as a painting. It was peaceful but not lonely. Long Fei Yi wasn't an alcoholic. He tasted wine like he tasted tea, and his every movement was elegant and noble. Han Yunshi wasn't an alcoholic either, but she tasted it seriously today. For the first time, she discovered that drinking wine was also a kind of pleasure. A distant bell rang. It was midnight. Han Yunshi stood up and bowed deeply. Your Highness, this concubine wishes you a happy new year. I hope that everything will go smoothly this year and that your Highness will be in good health. He was the head of the household and her husband. This kind of etiquette was necessary. This year, Long Fei Yi muttered to himself. He seemed to be thinking about something, but also seemed to be looking forward to it. He gave Han Yunshi a large red packet. You may dispense with the formalities. Long Fei Yi left the table and sat by the door, staring blankly at the snowy scenery. Your Highness, is there something on your mind? Han Yunshi asked with concern. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything. He waved his hand, indicating for her to come over. Han Yunshi sat next to him. She thought that Long Fei Yi would say something, but who knew that he would remain silent? After sitting for a long time, Han Yunshi was tired. Recently, she had been too immersed in the detoxification system. Although she wasn't mentally and physically exhausted, she was still tired and couldn't stay up through the night. Han Yunshi sat and waited. Drowsily, she slowly leaned against Long Fei Yi's shoulder. Long Fei Yi glanced at her and let her lean on him. Soon Han Yunshi really fell asleep. Her entire body leaned against him. Bring the princess's fox fur coat. Long Fei Yi ordered in a low voice. Long Fei Yi carefully pulled the sleeping person into his arms and wrapped her in the fox fur coat, letting her sleep more peacefully. Your Highness, it's cold. Why don't you return to your room to sleep? A servant girl whispered. Long Fei Yi only waved his hand, indicating for them to withdraw. The servant girls didn't dare to persuade him and could only disperse. The snow became heavier and heavier, but it also became more and more silent. Long Fei Yi stared at the snowy ground, lost in thought. Many New Year's Eves, Grand Concubine Yi would fall asleep right after midnight. Mu Fei would wait for him under the plum trees in the back courtyard of Arid Peace Palace, waiting for him to pay his New Year's greetings. Every year Mu Fei would ask him, "Year, it's been another year. Are you ready?" Ever since Mu Fei passed away, he hadn't stayed up late for New Year's. It's been another year. I'm willing to win the heart of one person, never to part even in old age. Han Yunxi, if you have to make a choice one day, what's the most important thing in your heart? He muttered to himself as he took out the perplexing butterfly illusion from Han Yunxi's sleeve and played with it in his hands. That night Han Yunxi slept soundly in Long Fei Ye's arms. She had no idea that Long Fei Ye's heart was filled with thousands of thoughts. She had a beautiful dream where winter passed and spring came. Plum blossoms fluttered in the air as Long Fei Yi stood among them, waving at her. Early next morning Han Yunxi woke up to find herself sleeping in her own room. As soon as she left the room, she ran into a guard reporting Long Fei Ye's affairs. They'd barely had a few days of peace before Emperor Tianhui came looking for trouble again. Your Highness, the county magistrates from the 3 major prefectures all knelt outside the senior provincial official's estate early this morning. They said they wouldn't go back until they saw you, the guard reported. Let them kneel? Han Yunxi said unhappily. Needless to say, Emperor Tianhui must have ordered these little county magistrates to act so boldly. Their only motive was grain. Although they lacked grain, at least they wouldn't starve the disaster victims this New Year's. What else did Emperor Tianhui want? Long Fei Yi might have won the hearts of the people, but he was also maintaining stability in Tianning's disaster areas. If Long Fei Yi hadn't taken the grain from the imperial uncle's estate this time, Emperor Tianhui might not have had a peaceful New Year's. The guard was troubled. The 3 major prefectures had over a dozen county magistrates under them. It wasn't appropriate for them to kneel on the first day of the year. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi went along with Han Yunxi's wishes. Let them kneel. Your lordship won't return until the 15th. The 15th? Han Yunxi almost laughed out loud. If those county magistrates heard those 2 words, they'd probably kneel for half a day before scrambling to run back. Your Highness, are we going to look for grain? Han Yunxi asked curiously. She always knew Long Fei Yi was confident, but she had no idea where they were supposed to find grain. Go make preparations. We'll set out in the afternoon, Long Fei Yi said simply. Since New Year's was over, it was time for Emperor Tianhui to beg them to go back. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.